Or- Okay, the one for the slide, announcement. Good evening, calling to order this meeting of the Home Committee for Wednesday, December 20th, 2023. I'm Peggy Frail, co-chair. This is Natasha Espada from the Planning Board, co-chair, and we have our quorum. So we're going to get started tonight. We have quite a few scenarios to present, or rather our consultants, our fabulous consultants have scenarios to present. But before we start with that, I just wanted to take a moment for those joining us online and those in the room to review a decision that was made in our previous meeting, which deals with Percy Station. One of the things that we had talked about extensively, or rather didn't talk about, but heard extensive public comment about at our first public forum, was the inclusion of the Percy Station in our compliance modeling.
Failure to include.
Right, the desire to include Percy Station in our compliance modeling, which we hadn't done at our first public forum. And I wanted to let the public know that we will not be including Percy in our modeling moving forward. And the reasons for this are what I'd like to explain. So when we got the public feedback and went back to look at Percy Station with our consultants and with this group, what we realized is what we realized when we were looking at this with the housing plan working group, which is that there is not enough usable land to make a compliant district at Hersey. So we have the business district that exists at Hersey and one non-compliant lot, or one non-conforming lot, thank you, which totals about half an acre. There's also the MBTA lot, which is another acre and a half, but is not compliant. We wouldn't be able to count that because it's publicly owned land. You can't count publicly owned land in a compliant district. So in order to make a compliant district at Hersey, we would have to rezone 4.5 acres of single family residences, which this group has decided not to do as part of the MBTA community's charge of this commission. This committee. We feel that it would be very distracting, first of all, that it would get people focused on the wrong things. Our mission here with this committee is to get a compliant MBTA communities district created and passed through town meeting, and we don't have we need to stick to that charge. And we felt like trying to change Hersey that dramatically and in a different way from all of the other districts that we're putting together would be very difficult. So we have decided that we would make a recommendation to the planning board to rezone the business parcels, the business district that exists, but not to change anything else. And so we took a vote on that at our last meeting, which was public, so perhaps some people online or in the room saw that meeting. But I wanted to just sort of get that on the record and explain that decision right off the bat so that everyone would know that that is why we did that.
And I can also add, we need 5 contiguous, is that correct? 5 contiguous acres.
Mm-hmm.
And as you mentioned, the general residential would have to be 4.5 of those because the MBTA communities, is that correct? Because the MBTA station doesn't comply.
Right.
So that the proportion of general residential is a lot higher than in any other district.
Well, it's actually not general residence there, it's single family.
I'm sorry, the single family, yes, thank you. The single family residence would be significantly higher than in any other location in Needham.
Well, in fact, it would be the only single family district that we rezone.
Correct.
As part of this. So I just want to make sure that everyone's aware of that, that we are recommending the planning board. And I think that this will be one of a few areas that we recommend for rezoning, but that's not, that we have decided is not within the charge of this committee. So
May I comment on the recommended rezoning?
Sure.
Yeah, what we have in mind is what was done, on Chestnut Street where Panini's Market is, you know, you're going along Chestnut Street and you're almost to New.
Central,
coming
Central.
It's central.
Central,
Central.
yeah, we say that, we say the wrong words. Central Avenue, all right, and you know where Panini's Market is, the corner of Gould Street and Central. There's an overlay district over that. And it wasn't that long ago, within the past year, that the planning board approved a project for that overlay district, which will involve a combination of a redone market and other retail uses and a significant number of multifamily units, including a significant number of affordable units for that site. And it's that kind of an overlay that we have at a very similar location. That is, the underlying zoning is neighborhood business that could be useful here to have a slightly higher density development that might include some multifamily.
And so I think as a result of our decision on December 11th, the modeling that would be shown is that, well, only non-residential districts or general residence districts are those that are being considered for rezoning to the MBTA.
Yes, as has been the case for sorry, we haven't at any point looked at rezoning single family.
I'm just summarizing.
Yeah. Absolutely. So folks won't see Percy modeled moving forward. It is not because we forgot or didn't look at it. It was simply because we couldn't make it compliant. And so we're gonna make that recommendation and we're gonna move on to the meat of our program tonight, which is to turn it over to Eric and Emily for their, oh, actually.
Take a roll call.
I don't think we need to take a roll call, but we do need to approve the minutes. So the minutes for all of our previous meetings were included in tonight's packet. Does anyone have any comments or discussion on the minutes?
I wasn't here on October 15th, so I'm so glad to revote on the others separately.
Sure. I would welcome a motion to vote on all of them except October 18th.
Could I see the dates?
It's September 7th, October 5th, October 18th, November 9th, and November 15th, but you said you weren't here for October 18th.
Thank you. So I move approval of the minutes from September 7th, October 5th, November 9th, and November 15th. Sorry.
Okay, and do we need a roll call vote for this?
We do because Michael's online.
Oh, right, okay, super. So, Natasha? Yes.
Aye.
Michael? Aye, okay.
Yes.
You have a thumbs up.
I have a lot of background noise. So.
Aye.
Jean?
Aye.
Josh? And I vote yes, so then we would need, so that passes unanimously, and then if we could have a
I'll make
motion.
Parallel motion to adopt the minutes of the 18th.
I second that.
Again, okay, Natasha? Aye.
Aye.
Michael?
Aye.
Aye.
Steve?
Aye.
No, I'm saying.
You're abstaining, and I vote yes, so we have however many yays and one abstention, so we pass. Fantastic. All right, so now Eric and Emily, take it away.
Purple screen share.
And Eric, you'll be showing four, right? Four different scenarios with variations.
Well, you know how we like to be overachievers here, so we'll show you 6. 4 that you all saw in the packet, but just in talking with Katie the other day, we did run 2 additional scenarios that reflect the public feedback from the last meeting. So it would just be important to bring that forward and show you. As you can imagine, the public feedback was generally to be more flexible with the zoning than what we were considering for the housing plan. So the unit counts are just higher in that case, and the density is higher, but we just want to show that to be responsive to the feedback that we got at the public meeting. So,
But the goal of the meeting is to move forward with 3.
that's up to you, however many you all want to move forward with for the upcoming meeting in January, the public meeting
For the
number 2,
public meeting.
January. I would suggest no more than 3.
Okay. Just to kind of set it up for everyone to understand that we
Yeah.
have 6, but that we really want to narrow it down, and then those can be tweaked, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, so tonight we'll go over the scenario modeling results, most, 4 of the scenarios, which you have hopefully seen in the packet. We'll go over the fiscal impact model process and the results. That you haven't seen, that was something we just needed time until today, but it's all ready, so we'll show you today. The economic feasibility analysis, which was the analysis on different scenarios for inclusionary zoning and potentially raising above the 12.5% that the town has in some of its districts today. You saw that in the packet, but we'll go over that today. And then just a really high level discussion of some thoughts on public meeting number 2 in terms of content and structure. Nothing's really been fleshed out, but we've just been kind of kicking around some ideas, so we thought it'd be good to at least start that tonight. Okay, so for the scenarios, we ran the original 4, which we sent in the packet, which includes what you all asked for when we last met in person. So what I'm calling the sort of minimum housing unit count scenario. So how low can we get the unit capacity number, still staying within the 15 dwelling units an acre that we need, as well as the overall district acres that we need. So what we did with this, and these sort of outlined in the 5 bullets at the top of the slide, was we began with existing zoning districts, so not the housing plan, but existing zoning districts as they're drawn today, because that would sort of minimize the amount of change that we have to do, right? So it's all about trying to minimize. So we started with existing zoning districts, but then we applied the zoning parameters from that the housing plan envisioned. So the housing plan zoning parameters will be consistent from scenario 1 through scenario 4 that we talk about tonight. So that includes the height, the dimensions, and the density. For this, because we're trying to limit unit count, we ran this at 1.5 parking spaces per unit requirement. Scenario 2, 3, and 4, which you've seen, were run by what the committee asked for, which is 1.0 parking spaces, but this one's at 1.5. So once we did those first 3 things, we understood the geography that we were working with in terms of the districts and the zoning, and we looked at what that yielded from a unit capacity standpoint, as well as a density standpoint, and we realized we're still above what I would consider the sort of minimum number of units that we needed. So from there, we started to look at, could we start removing some of the districts from the overall MBTA district to try to get those districts out, which would then therefore remove the number of units. So we did that next. We tried to remove a couple of them. Some of them worked, some of them didn't. Like some of them might drop us too far below the unit count that we needed by removing the
What
districts.
scenario, what number is the scenario you're referring to now?
1.
Oh, you're still referring to 1.
Yep. So we'll go through them one by one.
Yes.
Some of the districts, by removing them, dropped our dwelling unit count below 15. So it was a really kind of an iterative process. So we went through that process. And then once we had what we believed were the districts that we were going to need to get the units to really get the density, that was really the key thing with the districts. We were still a little bit over the unit count. So what we did then was we just introduced an 18 dwelling unit per acre cap in both Avery Square and Chestnut Street districts. And that helped us get down, because in the housing plan, the only district is really A1 that has the 18 unit dwelling unit cap. The other districts don't have one. So we introduced those in Avery Square and Chestnut, and that helped bring the unit count down and the density count down a little bit further. So here's a map for scenario 1 illustrating the districts that are being modeled under the zoning parameters that I just discussed. For the most part, with the exception of the industrial district that's to the north into the west of the Avery Square. The remainder of the district is contiguous, so that's good. We just have that one piece of industrial to the north and to the west.
And is that 5 acres?
It is, it's over 5 acres.
So that's why it can stand alone.
Correct.
Okay.
Correct.
Is it okay to ask a question about contiguity?
Yeah.
It was just said that that this is all contiguous. And so the point at which the industrial district north of Rosemary Street crosses the commuter rail and connects with the business district, the pink business district. That point is good enough to provide contiguity.
It looks like it's diagonal across the right of way.
Yeah.
And all indications from HLC, that should be fine.
That should be fine. All right, then.
Worst case scenario, Gene, if it doesn't happen to be, we just break the districts in two. They're both large enough.
Because we don't need
so-
this, all of this contiguity. Isn't it true that you need half of the total number of acres? Half. Now, our total number of acres is not 50 acres, it's something like.
Yeah, it's like
120.
120, yeah,
And so we have, I've been thinking we need 60 contiguous.
yeah.
But this, if they allow us to have contiguity at a point like that, we're all set.
Yep.
And the same thing is true at May Street, where the Garden Street Overlay District meets the business district just on the south side of that business district on Main Street.
Yep,
Yeah, that's also the very similar point with the railroad right of way and the
Yep.
street. But then when we come down to Great Plain Avenue, where it's written on the plan, MBTA Needham Center. How do you get contiguity between that little patch of industrial and the Garden Street?
so I know it's really hard to see on this map, but in GIS, we zoomed in on it. The industrial parcel actually has a tiny little arm that kind of comes up. It's super skinny
Yeah.
and it hits Great Plain Avenue.
Does?
And the district to the north of that also has a little arm that comes down the right of way. So you just have to jump Great Plain Avenue and
Beautiful.
should be good to
Beautiful.
go.
I was worried about that.
Yeah, so were we.
Appreciate
We
the
double checked
explanation.
that. Okay. So just in terms of scenario one results, this is what it looks like modeling for the 5 districts that we just showed on the map: apartment, business, Avery Square, Chestnut, and industrial. So you can see we're well above the gross acreage number that we need. We're at 111. The unit capacity is 1637. I'll come back to that in a second. And we got the density basically to 15.0. Now, you may recognize that 1637 is not your unit capacity that you need. You need 1784. Hopefully that's the right number. So thank you, 1784. So why are we below? Well, scenario number 7 that we did was modeling the mandatory mixed use district of the center business district. So we modeled that completely separately, which the guidelines allow us to do. And that yielded a unit capacity in the center business district of 337 units. So essentially what you can do is you use that 337 as an offset. So that 337 basically gets added to 1637 and it puts us above the 1784 that we need, if that makes sense.
May I ask a question about Avery Square? The inclusion of Avery Square, the big orange patch, that means that multifamily will be allowed by right in the Avery Square area. I kind of don't remember if that's what we had in mind for Avery Square.
It's currently allowed by special permit in Avery Square.
Excuse me, it's now allowed by special.
permit.
Standalone multifamily is now allowed by special permit in Avery Square.
Yes,
And we'd just be changing that to allow it by right,
but they're changing the dimensionals.
changing. Okay, thank you. Satisfied.
Great. Good. So this would constitute, as of right now, our sort of lowest unit scenario. Okay. Scenario number 2, moving on. This is housing plan. As envisioned in the housing plan. With the districts that were envisioned in the housing plan and the changes of zoning districts from one to another. All of the proposed zoning, actual zoning changes to dimensions, height and density. This now models a 1.0 parking space per unit requirement instead of the 1.5 that we looked at in the previous scenario. Just as a reminder, this particular scenario number 2 does not include general residence or center business at all. It just models what's envisioned in the housing plan. And then just one quick change, there was one small apartment 1 district that was initially adjacent to the center business and one small industrial district that was adjacent. And because we're not including the center business district in this housing plan, they become non-contiguous and they were also less than 5 acres. So we had to just drop those out. What you'll see as we go through scenario 3 and 4, as we incorporate this new, what we're calling the center business residential, the little kind of piece that gets us contiguity, those smaller districts get brought back in because they become contiguous with center business.
Scenario 2 map does not show those areas at all.
Right, because they're not.
Correct.
I'm trying to figure out what they are, right? Do you explain more what they are, the districts that were left out? I'm not sure.
Yeah, it's right there above the chair.
You can make it on that.
It looks like,
So if you look out here.
Yeah.
This apartment 1 district is connected to GR, and since we don't model GR in scenario 2 or 3. This A1 district stands by itself, because it's non-contiguous. So and it's less than 5 acres, so we can't model it.
And same with the industrial in the north.
Oh, yeah, and then all the way north where the arrow is, north on Highland Avenue. The GR district gives us contiguity between A1 and that small piece of industrial. When we're not modeling GR, we don't have contiguity, and that piece of industrial all the way at the top there is not contiguous and it's not bigger than 5 acres, so we have to drop that too.
The difference between scenario 1 and scenario 2 is the A1 district. The additional A1 district. All the gray.
It's the existing zoning in the first one. And then this is the housing plan zoning.
Right, which is mostly A1 gray,
Yeah, basically,
Yeah.
yeah, it's a lot of,
except for it doesn't have the GR and it doesn't have a.
yep. And we're also in this one modeling, this also includes Hillside Avenue. In scenario 1, that was the one district that we dropped from the leased unit was Hillside Avenue, which is the purple district all the way to the north, next to A1. Yeah, right there. That got dropped in scenario 1 just to try to get the unit count down as far as we could.
Right.
but that already allows multifamily housing, that special permit. That district. The Hillside Avenue business, Hillside Avenue business is the name of that district, isn't it?
Yes,
Where the new housing just went in.
Yeah,
on Wall Street.
that apartments are allowed by special permit there.
Yeah, so that already allows multifamily. It's easy to, people wouldn't see that as much of a change, so, yeah.
So can you go back to the map for scenario 1, just to compare? So how do I describe it? There's a little red district on this map next to the blue towards the bottom by Great Plain Ave. On the other maps, it's marked A1.
That's great.
So is that one, is that industrial or is that A1?
yeah, it represents in the housing plan, I think that was envisioned as being rezoned to A1 from industrial.
So it's industrial currently.
I understand, okay, so in all of it, so there are some cases where the names of the districts would be changed. Okay.
Exactly. Okay, so map for scenario 2, really. The primary difference again here is no general residence and nothing for the center business district. So the housing plan as modeled would result in 2,529 units with a density of 16.5 dwelling units an acre. And we have tons of contiguity, so getting the district sizes is not a problem. And obviously, we have more gross acreage than we need. Scenario 3 basically takes what we just looked at for the housing plan, as well as continuing with the 1.0 parking ratio. And now we're just gonna add to the housing plan. So a couple of things to note in this one, scenario 3. One is where we didn't have contiguity before with certain standalone districts, we're now starting to pick up contiguity, so we're able to bring them back in. So there's one new, I call it a new, but new A1 district that is now basically adjacent to this center business residential. We now added in that the little center business residential piece that we talked about the last time we were together in person. And this again does not include general residence. So you can see here on the map, this new sort of pinkish color where it says BCTRR. This was our proposal that we talked about at our virtual meeting the other week. So adding that in, by adding that in, we also pick up that small piece of A1 to the west of center residential. So that's kind of primarily our new change here. We're able to pick this up because now we have contiguity coming this way. And since we're picking up additional districts, as you would probably expect, our unit capacity rises once again, as does our gross acreage. So we have 100 and almost 87 gross acres, 2,630 units, and density of 15.8.
So why does the density go down from scenario 2 to scenario 3?
So if you look at the density of the center business residential district, it's at 7.6, so that's probably some of the reason. You're adding in almost 12 additional acres, but at a density of 7.6 dwelling units an acre. Okay, and then the last one, again, just building upon what we talked about, the big change here is we're adding in general residence. By doing that, we're able to pick up that industrial district on Highland Avenue all the way up north. So again, we're adding that, we're getting that back now, as we just talked about. So again, all the sort of dark blue-ish purple color is all the GR. And then all the way up north, we're picking up that industrial district because we now have GR for contiguity. And then we are adding a ton of acreage with GR. And I think if you remember back several months ago when we looked at this, we kind of, at least I had a feeling this was going to happen, but it's confirmed. We're adding in almost 160 acres. So it brings us up to 353 total acres, 2,847 units, but we don't meet our dwelling unit per acre number because across GR, the dwelling units per acre is 1.2.
Wait, across street, isn't it zone for 2?
Under this scenario, we set the zoning parameter to allow 4 dwelling units per acre. The committee said, test it at 3 and test it at 4. Obviously, if 4 doesn't work, I didn't even bother to test 3. So that's why it's set at 4. But the thing you have to remember is not every parcel gets assigned 4 dwelling units. Some parcels, I believe that we set the minimum lot size at 10,000 square feet for the GR. A ton of lots in GR are not 10,000 square feet. So we add acreage, but we don't add units. So that drives the density down and the number of units down. So,
Because the units from 4 to 3 aren't that many. It's like more like 300 or 200, but the acreage is huge. It's almost double. on the
Yeah,
first one.
exactly.
And can you go back to the map before? This includes the Hierarch homes in the Linden. Was there, I think down south, is that the Hierarch homes in the Linden?
No, it is not.
That's not, okay.
Yeah,
Okay.
it is not. It's the general residence area along Maple Street. Yeah. It may include the general residence area that is public housing, That's the duplexes and the little cottages,
Okay,
yeah, but not Linden Chambers.
South of Linden Chambers.
Yeah, okay.
So I can, like, here.
yeah,
Yeah.
Linden Chamber, this is Linden Chamber.
so okay, so when we had the discussion last time, there was a discussion not to include Linden
Right.
Chambers, but the Highland homes, that's separate, I mean, is that?
Not part of their project, right?
Exactly.
Right.
So there's no discussion, there's no conflict in including it here with any future plans that they may have.
I think so.
But isn't it true that you tested this, but it doesn't work?
It doesn't work.
So we're not going forward with any, including any of these general.
Well-
Well, we're not going forward with this,
With scenario four.
but we have to have a discussion about whether we're going forward with general residence. I mean, for example, at our public forum, folks indicated that they would like to increase the density in general residence. So we have to have a discussion about it.
Oh,
That's what I'm
yeah.
saying.
But this is working with general residents at how many units per 10,000 square foot lot?
It's 4 dwelling units per acre.
Per acre. Oh, well,
Yeah.
that's current, that's your current, essentially current, no.
No, it's two.
That's 2. So we had to increase it from 2 to 4. Or to 3, but it's got to be at least 3 or 4 to be compliant with MBTA. That's the issue that we ran into a month or 2 ago when we were going through that. So if you had a 10,000 square foot lot, that's effectively 16 units an acre.
Oh, okay, that's what I asked, but I didn't understand your original answer. Okay, so it's 4 units per 10,000 square foot lot. So if you multiply 10,000 by 4, you get 40,000 square foot lot. And that would be 16.
Yes,
Mhm.
yeah.
So the goal here, I think, is scenario one being the least come out, and it doesn't meet it, but the number 2 and number 3 do meet it.
Number one means it.
Number one
Sorry,
meets it.
number 1 meets it, number 4 is the only one that doesn't meet it, and it's the one that has the most, so we need to figure out the 3. That, and tweaking them with general residential or not, right? I mean, I'm just trying to figure out what is the goal of the conversation is to understand which areas we want to include
Well,
in the 3 scenarios.
Katie, you look like you have something to say.
Oh, just to answer Natasha's question with a question, do you want to present the scenarios that you didn't ask us for? That Eric referenced at the beginning, which was, we didn't have anything modeled in those 4 scenarios that actually increased the height, which was the biggest feedback we got in the November meeting. So I think if
So
we
those are 3 more scenarios.
add 2 more to the table, yeah.
Okay.
Before you do that, could I just ask a question? I hate to do it late in the game. And scenario 3, can we just kind of go back to scenario 3? And the map that actually represents it. I mean, I know we had a long conversation about how to manage the center, and how to loop around it. One option though that we didn't talk about, which was the idea, which is represented, I think, in the housing plan, which was to rezone Stephen Palmer land, the YMCA land to apartment. And link it the other way,
Crescent, the other side.
Oh, okay.
link it around the other side of
Where
the
the park
center,
is.
where the park is. To not, so you wouldn't be using the streetscape in the center. I just kind of want to put that out as an option that we haven't really discussed in this context, but it kind of grabs that land on the other side and then doesn't interfere with any of the mixed use that is happening in the center itself.
I think when we were looking at that map, there wasn't continuity because really want, but the Walgreens parking lot and the Walgreens is one
Oh, that's
parcel.
because of the parcel.
Yeah.
So it,
The
we
split
had to
parcel
look
is your
for
parcel.
some. And so then you're,
Okay, sorry, I didn't remember that piece of it.
yeah.
There's a lot to remember.
I forgot about that.
Yes. If I could comment on that from my memory of being serving in the housing plan working group. The proposal was to cross Main Street, the church at the corner of Main Street, St. Joseph's Church is already zoned apartment A1, has been from the 80s. But cross Main Street and zone the St. Joseph School Apartment A1. Now, that would be excluded land, but as I understand it from my discussion about using the library for contiguity, it's okay to use it if it's only for contiguity. So then you get St. Joseph School rezoned, then right across the street is the Stephen Farmer Apartments. So you can get that far and include the Stephen Farmer Apartments. Now, the difficulty is going farther, I guess you should say farther south. Because you either start talking about rezoning the park itself, or on the opposite side of Pickering Street, you have a little patch of SR, single residence B, a little street, Pickering Court, I think it's called.
That's shown on this now.
Yeah, and we've been really hesitant, or at least I have been, about rezoning these little areas of SRB that are kind of adjacent to our business district. So that is what I recall as being the difficulty of making that crescent work, is that we'd have to rezone that little bit of SRB. Or we'd have to rezone the park, which people might, it just might create
Well,
controversy.
we can't include the park in the map. Because it's town on land.
You can, we just can't include it in the model.
Oh, well, okay,
Yeah.
well.
It has the
we're not
effect if you would
including
have to bump up the density on other parcels in order to counteract the fact that that's excluded land.
Okay.
So you can include it in the district, it just has
doesn't-
an effect on it, yeah,
Okay.
exactly.
But those would be the two possibilities of continuing that right down to Great Plain Avenue.
And you did think that Stephen Palmer would potentially be countable, right? Because it's currently housing.
I do not, we haven't discussed that one, so I don't know if they're up to speed on Stephen Palmer, but because we're gonna go through a public process about what the future of that parcel is, and we're not far enough along to recommit it to housing, I don't think it would pass muster.
Yeah,
Um,
you'd have to do that pretty quickly.
Okay,
I
so
see.
if that's the
I
case, then
see.
we don't
That's
have
the
any
issue.
continuity
Ah.
to the Y.
Right.
Yeah.
So we can't include the Y.
And because you're raising this issue about whether it was far enough along in the disposition process of public land. The same thing, of course, is true, even more true for Hillside Avenue. For
Hillside
the
School.
old school, so,
For
excuse me,
Hillside
the old
School.
school at Hillside, yeah. From what I've read of this select board's plans, and you know better than I do, Heidi, of what they're going to do in the coming years, and that is just to investigate cleaning it up. and
It's
so
too
forth.
undetermined to.
It's very undetermined its future use, yeah. And that's in scenario 3, that big patch that's next to the Crescent Road Industrial.
All right, so.
I really think that's problematic. to
Yeah,
me.
so let's look at those other maps
Sure.
that have increased height.
This is just the result of those scenarios we went through. Okay, so. What we did. Let's just create 2 additional scenarios. So I'll call this scenario 5. This sort of feeds in the public input summaries that Emily provided the last time we were together in person. So I used those little indicator lines on the bar charts. To pick what I thought looked like consensus from the dot exercise. And just applied that. I know there's way more numbers here than there are in all the others, so I don't expect you to digest all of this right now, but the primary changes, for the most part, the minimum lot sizes kind of stay somewhat similar to what we have in the housing plan. But the heights, as you can see, go up. We're talking four stories in most districts, up to 4.5 in industrial. GRs at 2.5, center residential at 3.5, but everything else is 4 and above. We're introducing FAR above 1 in nearly every district except for GR, which maintains its max lot coverage in industrial. you can see we're at 60% lot coverage and 70 in industrial. So we're allowing, excuse me, a bigger footprint and more height, so we get more density. Therefore, we get more unit count. Setbacks generally stay the same. Parking is at 1.0, we kept that through. And then the other huge change is maximum dwelling units per acre. Everywhere except for general residence, people were at basically the 24 mark. So just to get a sense of what that looked like, and to give you all a sense of what that looked like. Scenario 5 takes the housing plan, essentially mimics the map in scenario 3, so no GR, and we didn't have that little piece of industrial or that little piece of A1. So it gives us over 3,000, almost 3,100 units and a density of 22.4. And then send it my way with GR. It still really doesn't work.
That's maximum GR, right? Not partial. It's the same one you showed in
Mhm.
before.
Exactly.
So there could be a hybrid with partial GR that gets you over 12.
Could there also be potential, if you were to change the 10,000 square foot minimum lot to 5,000? Would that increase? And I think that's gonna. It'd be interesting to see if including GR is important to the group and reducing that lot, either 7,500 or 5,000, you're gonna have a lot more lots and you're gonna get that number over there.
I would agree.
But are those lots feasible for building housing? Because we were hearing from developers that the lots have to be a minimum size for it to be viable. So would 5,000 discourage it?
It would be hard to get 4 units on 5,000.
Right, so.
It
So
would
6 of one, half of another, really. I mean, it might hit the compliance model, but it wouldn't be
It would be beneficial. for
viable in
actual
real life.
growth.
Mhm.
Yeah, it wouldn't be economical.
Right.
Right, and I think it's important at some point to have a conversation about what's economically viable. Because we're talking about these densities as though they are uniform across the entire district, and they don't need to be. And in fact, maybe they shouldn't be in order to accommodate some of these changes that we want to make. So at some point, we need to, roll up our sleeves and kind of get into the weeds here.
On this chart, the maximum lot coverage figures where it says 0%. What does that mean?
No, it should say an NA.
So that means there's no.
Yeah, because FAR takes the place of maximum lot coverage.
Okay.
Sorry, that's a really good distinction. I apologize.
You don't want both. I mean,
Yeah.
I've seen communities do both, but it means that they're not actually trying to do anything. Yeah,
Yeah.
because they work against each other.
Yeah, it should say not applicable.
Okay, well, since it's been brought up, maybe we have a discussion about height and density, and get a sense of where we're going. I guess our goal for this meeting is to pick hopefully three scenarios that we bring to our public. We need to leave this meeting with that. Whether they're the maps that have been presented to us so far and we just pick 3, or if we pick 2 and tweak 1 or whatever, we need to sort of make some decisions about what generally we feel is important. I think it is important to reflect some of the public feedback that we got in our first meeting. But it's also, I think, important for us to recognize that if our goal is to really, I think, present a real spectrum of choices, we need to make at least one of those options one that would be more economically viable in terms of what people are telling us is necessary to actually build housing. And that's an increased density, at least in a portion of this district.
my own view, Heidi, is I think you said that very well, that these are a spectrum of choices, and I think. When we go to the public meeting, we ought to be clear that none of these scenarios, whatever the three we end up with, are recommended at this point by the committee. They are a spectrum of choices. We're in process. And these are informed thoughts, but they're not a recommendation because it's intended to tease out responses from the public.
Yeah, and it might be nice to have a little daylight in between our choices too, so. For me, I'm thinking if we bring the minimum scenario and we bring 3 or 4. And then we also bring maybe 3 plus, maybe plus your height. But maybe also with some density changes as we discussed, so that. The 3 scenarios don't necessarily look like each other. I think it'll give people more discussion to give feedback about what they see and what they like. Whether that plan is like the winner that we're going with is not really the point. Point is to spark the discussion, right?
And to have choices rather than just minuscule choices, because then those could be figured out later.
Yeah, for example, I'd like to throw out there, just as a starting point to spark discussion. I think one thing that we all talk about, or that I have heard much discussion about, is, for example, 100 West, where at one point we were talking about having some assisted living and so on. That building, I think, is about 50 units per acre density. And generally, the community seems to have been very supportive of having housing at that level there. And from what I understand, that's a viable level, but that's the viable floor for a development like that one. So I think we just need to think about how we could implement some higher density in maybe just certain places, and we could talk about where that goes. And maybe that higher density offsets some of the lower density in general residence, for example. I mean, I think we can apply a little nuance to our map so that the districts are not quite as rigid as we have them here.
I think your point on 100 West is completely right. Because what we're doing is, in effect, or what's been discussed, and is really downzoning 100 West from what exists there today. And it's 121 units are in that building today. At 16 units per acre, that comes out, it's about a 4-acre site, so that's about 64 units. So from a development perspective, it's changed because it's imposing a zoning regime that's irrelevant because the existing status quo already has double units. And so that sort of thinking, I think, it's important because right now it sits there as a vacant building. God knows what it will be. But if down zoning, it probably doesn't move things along in a constructive way.
Right. And I think the same is true in the center, where we have a lot of single-story or 2-story buildings that aren't going to hold enough density to encourage anyone to develop them into something else.
If I can piggyback on that same comment, I couldn't agree more. We had on that
Totally
chart 3.5. This is not the first one. We had 3.5 stories for the center business district, and I assumed that was maybe respecting the notion of not going higher than town hall, but I'm not quite sure this process gets driven by that field. We're not that close in this layout to town hall, and I don't know that driving everything in the center business district about by not going higher than town hall necessarily is good for. I personally don't think it's necessarily good for this process, nor do I think it's good for downtown, the center business.
Can I add that Chestnut Street is a huge opportunity? I think that there's a Chestnut Street overlay, never really worked as it was intended, right? Is that correct?
Well, it hasn't been implemented. It's basically zoning, it's 4 stories and then FAR 2.0.
So I think that's an opportunity, even more than the center, because the center's a lot smaller. This whole corridor seems underdeveloped.
Yeah.
So how do we create opportunities? But all the lots are really tiny. So the issue is, how do you create, right? So is there a way of incentivizing? I mean, they're private lots, right? So,
Well, they're private lots for people that have business or buildings that are paid off and with existing tenants and.
Right.
With the incentive, I mean, we're sitting next to the developer here, but the incentive is to create the potential for a development, to cause one owner to agree to sell to the other owner, so that you create a big enough footprint for something to happen.
And when you, just from a practical standpoint, when you try to aggregate a number of small parcels into, I'm sorry, when you try to aggregate a number of small parcels into a larger parcel that you can get the type of density, is you, eventually, the neighbors pick up on, and somebody's gonna hold out, and that's gonna drive the pricing up. And that's where the density piece comes in, because when you're looking at development of apartments, you're looking at it typically on a per unit basis. And, you know, so if you start to do the math, rough order of magnitude, probably, I don't love to throw numbers out there, but for this type of product, the bid and the ask between the buyer and the seller are gonna be pretty substantial. So the only way, I'll put it a different way, if you've got, income producing property, right, a large parcel that, income producing from, Walgreens, just use that as an example, there's a lot of cash flow coming from that Walgreens. So when you put, to get a little too technical, a value on that Walgreens, the idea of replacing that with multifamily housing on a per unit basis, you need a lot of density to replace that cash flow and incentivize a seller to sell. Then you get into more technicalities. Walgreens typically do 20-year leases with 4 or 5 year extensions, right? So you could be talking 40, not 40, but quite a long period of time for these parcels to free up. So the density really becomes the key to the creation of the housing.
All right, so we've heard from this end of the table. Does anyone else want to chime in, either on the idea of presenting these 3 maps with, like we said, along a spectrum, or any of the ideas that have been raised?
Can I raise a different question? So the idea of general residence, but just, what are the pros and cons of including or not including it? I mean, the way I see it, I mean, including it means you get extra density. It's basically upzoning 2-family into 3 or 4 family. I guess the downside is that we decided not to rezone the SRB or SRA, single residence, and general residence would be only single or 2-family residence to be zoned for multifamily. So is that, are there people living in general residence who may not like that? I feel like that's the downside. Am I missing the pros and cons there?
Well, also it dilutes the,
Right.
But that's it.
across the entire district. Yeah.
That's it.
May, but it doesn't have to, because what it could help you do is drive density in other areas.
Yeah.
Is-
Yeah.
So that way everyone,
I also feel like, to some extent, you could use general residence to like feather the density out as you move further away from the center, so that when you, like, so that you build up to the center, to the spine, I mean, along, the center of Needham, just Needham Center. So that you could have higher density towards the center of that map, and then it like decreases as you move out, which sort of makes more sense than like higher density and then single family. But it certainly is,
I think just to add to that, Heidi, we heard a lot in the housing plan about the needs of different housing types and price points. And so I think we're talking about, you know, a Carter building size development, et cetera, but there's this whole missing middle of townhomes and triple deckers and cottage housing. And so I guess in my mind, I think general residence is probably where we would be talking about those sorts of things. And so that might be a benefit. You are getting into more of, you know, like you said, we're not doing single residence A or B, but we are general residents, and that there's absolutely downsides for that, but.
But if you do a minimum and a maximum, kind of a partial, which is I think what you're saying, you know, to have a general residence has to be in one of them, but it can't be in the form that we've been presented. We have to figure out how to decrease the amount of general residence to increase the density, right?
Yeah.
Well, because we're at 8.7.
Unless we increase
or-
density elsewhere.
Right, it's, but I mean, you can't keep all of it. It seems unlikely that you would keep all of the one that has been presented. We'd have to cut in some areas.
Yeah.
Even if you create higher density.
It's a lot of.
Because it's too much,
mathematical
too many acres.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm seeing Michael has his hand up online.
Yeah, I just had a quick question.
Hear you, Michael?
Is it better now?
No. Do you want to, if you can't, do you want to put a comment in the chat? Or can we do that?
Yeah. I don't think there's a chat, but,
We disable chat so that. we can have
Could
a-
you, could you
Is it
call
kosher
if you text me?
All right, I think I have it now.
You can call my phone, I'll put it on speaker.
oh.
Am I coming through now?
I can email her your number.
Michael, if you call me or call, yeah,
Yeah,
Michael,
it-
call my cell phone and I'll put you on speaker.
Now, is it coming through now? I
Well, we
switched
have
to
a book
setting.
like this in the article in yesterday's Globe, I think it was yesterday, Somerville adopting, asked running triple deckers. And it was in respect, I think it's relevant to this conversation in terms of a housing option that's not, you know, one unit in a 200 unit development, but one unit in a three unit development. It's a different feel, it's a different look, it's a different animal, a different housing product than even though both fall within this program, they're radically different things.
Yeah.
I think it's a good idea when looking forward to the community meeting to present something like the scenario one map, which is, but I'm not sure I fully understand the metrics or the reasons why some areas were included and not included in that map. For example, Webster Green, the apartment building on Highland Avenue is already zoned apartment A1. And right across the street is the converted Avery School, which is converted to condominium. So both of those, the Avery School it was never rezoned for the multifamily use. I don't know exactly how it got done. It was school, but connecting those parcels down with the parcels that are shown here, it presents the difficulty of rezoning a few blocks of SRB. But if you take those two parcels together, Hillside and Avery School, they're across the street. I think that's okay. Don't they accumulate 5 acres? Why wouldn't we be showing them and using them in scenario one?
Well, we're trying to do the minimum possible.
Right.
Right.
No, they're not shown at all.
We're trying to do the
That's the
minimum
focus.
possible.
Scenario
one.
But this is, it's the most uncontroversial thing you could possibly imagine. These two are already used for multifamily
I mean,
housing.
we could adjust the district, but we could make changes, but they modeled it just to be the minimum. They didn't specifically pick.
But there may be other, when you think of the pros and cons and going forward with any particular scenario, there may be things that prove to be more controversial than we think. For example, Crescent Street Industrial. You know, people might say we shouldn't be doing that. I mean, I think we should, but it may be, so it may be that we end up saying, oh, we can't, we don't really want to bring that to town meeting. It's too, people don't like it, but but the use of Webster and Avery is just obvious. And the same, another thing is, why isn't Hillside Avenue Business shown? It's already a zone to allow multifamily. Again, why isn't that
Hang on one
shown?
second. So I have a question for Michael, but Katie, it looks like you have a response.
Yeah, just two comments, Jean. One is, we just edited down in the ways that as the model was telling us where we were bringing numbers down, that
Oh, I
we could get
see.
to it. So
So
it's
that's
just
the
an
point.
iterative process, but I also wanted to comment and maybe to be helpful for the whole group when you're thinking about the scenarios you want to pick tonight. The January meeting is as wide of options as we're going to get in this process. And so this group needs to think about what are the things you really want to get feedback on in terms of the minimum and the maximum, because after January, you're gonna start making really close
Specific
choices that are gonna
decisions.
close doors.
And I think
to
the
other
some of those
choices.
choices are the ones that you're talking about, Jean.
Okay,
Like, we're not
so-
quite there yet, but.
But I
we're
think,
going.
but I think Jean, to
I
your point,
understand better
instead of
now.
fine tuning the details of each scenario, pick the three scenarios, and then after the January meeting, you're gonna have to pick one scenario and really fine tune that one.
Okay. So now I
So, just to keep
understand
a full
why,
view.
I wanted
Yeah.
to share Michael's question.
why things are left out. It was just to bring it down to the minimum. Okay,
Right, yeah.
okay.
Michael says, how much would we need to reduce the general residence lot size to pick up the non-conform lot size home? Would 8,000 or 9,000 get most of them? We don't know.
We don't know.
We
I
don't
have
have
to,
an
I have
answer.
to look, I don't know off the top of my head.
So, but it sounds like most of the lots are 10,000 square foot, right? Or that's what they're
That's,
designed as, designated as.
the opposite of what I think you just said, which is more lots are probably under 10,000 square feet.
Oh, okay.
And the model is currently set at
Set
10,000 square feet.
But at the same time, we have Bill over here saying that 5,000 square foot lot is not gonna really,
Yeah, unless you're gonna go
Developable.
up, it's gonna be hard to do 3
Yeah.
or 4 units. But
okay. So maybe there's a sweet spot in there, but that
Yeah,
It might be
seems
8,000
kinda
square
arbitrary.
feet, but then you're talking about probably that triple decker,
Yeah.
and then you get into lot coverage and.
Okay. Well, let's see if we have like reasonable consensus.
That's what I was gonna say for
Yeah.
scenario one.
Are we all okay with including
Right.
the minimum?
I think we have to.
Yeah,
Yes.
now that I understand it better, I am okay.
Okay,
Yeah,
so it
misunderstood.
sounds like we have consensus there. Are we, I think we need to make a decision. I mean, the way I see it, 3 and 4 are both good contenders for our middle ground option. I think we should,
3 more than 4.
I think we should pick between those two, and you're right, it's probably 3,
So can we recap a little bit?
because
Scenario-
4 is non-compliant.
Right.
Scenario 2 is 1 with some A1. Right, and then scenario 3. It includes the center of district. as
Yeah,
well.
yeah.
I just wanted to kind of, just the first one is really minimal with the second one has more of the A1, which is what we, and then this, the third one seems to have the general, the central district.
Okay, so we'll do a formal vote in a sec, but.
Yeah.
I think 2 is central business as well.
No.
It doesn't.
No, but, the other thing about scenario 2, and I think, I'm sure the numbers would still work if you took out Hillside School, because I just think
Well, I think-
we're not gonna be able to
I
include that.
think
How could we
scenario
include
3
it?
though is a better middle ground,
Yeah,
because it includes the residential in the center.
it's 2 plus the center, and it can be tweaked later, Dean, so because.
What, scenario 3 is a better one than scenario? Well,
Because it has the central, this is the discussion, I think it has the center business district, and I think that's advantageous.
Yeah, I agree.
It depends on, what it's calling for in that central business district, that little strip along Great Plain Avenue near Needham Bank is standalone multifamily.
We can
now-
tweak, we can
later.
tweak, but the point is that this has more land and more density.
And it's
And
also on the
includes more
right.
areas of town.
So you're saying,
So we're not
prefer a
saying-
scenario 3, to scenario two as far as a presentation.
For the presentation,
Right.
yeah, and again, none of these are final, like, just because we're picking scenario one or scenario three to go to this community forum, it doesn't mean that that's the final form at all. We can still go street by street and tweak and be totally in nitty gritty. But for, you know, our spectrum, we want minimum, middle ground, and
Some partial.
and lots.
Yeah, large.
So
Scenario five, that has a height, right?
scenario
Five.
five, but I might suggest that we even bump scenario five. Remember what Katie said, go big or go home, this is our last opportunity.
Did you say that exactly? I didn't-
It's now in the minutes.
I would say that I think we can make scenario five a little bit more robust. I would like to see the kind of zoning that will allow us to keep 100 West. To do Hillcrest Gardens in some
And is that five?
fashion.
That's five.
Well, it's not five, no,
No?
it's 5 plus.
Should we go through and say, okay, so one seems like a minimum, two, out of two and three seems like the right one.
Yeah.
I disagree.
Okay,
Okay,
we'll
so we'll come
vote,
back.
Jane, not to worry, we'll
Four,
discuss,
four has the general residential, but it doesn't meet it, it's 8.7.
not compliant.
And then you had 5 and 6,
Can you show?
and can you show those again, just to,
Yeah, so 5 is without general residence,
Can
6
you,
is with
Al-
DR, but, and this is the zoning that goes with both of those.
And just an observation, so between 1, 3, and 5, general residence is included in none of those.
Exactly, and I think that's a problem.
that's a problem, right?
So we don't have to pick those, just like I'm saying, I want 5 plus, we can do.
I think there's one that has more density and
To add
and some general residence, and that's the maximum.
But we're using these as our outlines.
I think the challenge is that any of the ones that we have general residents fail. And I
So
don't
we're
think
gonna need to
it's,
tweak them.
I think we need to tweak it. I think presenting something that is failing on its face is confusing and disruptive.
Yeah, totally agree. We only want to present viable options.
Yeah.
At the community forum.
So there has to be another variation with some partial general,
Somehow getting
With more-
partial.
So
with more density.
Yes.
Than 5.
where is option 6?
Do you want to see the numbers or the zoning?
The numbers, right? Because you're trying to figure out, I mean, it doesn't mean, right? 6 doesn't.
Can we look
mean-
at
The scenario.
Can we look at each?
This is the zoning that's applied to both 5 and 6.
Okay,
6 is 9.6.
so I guess what I'm asking is, if we decide, this is general residence at 4 units, correct? 4 units per acre.
That's correct.
So I guess what I'm asking is, if we were to keep scenario 6 with our general residence of 4 units per acre, but find some areas where we're gonna bump the density along the spine, like for 100 West, can we change that overall count of unit density so that we can bring this or something similar to it plan to the community forum as our maximum? That's a good idea.
So basically,
Do we
keep
have
the
to do-
general residence as is with that.
So keep it at 4.
Bump the
which we
density
heard from
in the,
public
at least
forums,
some of
people
the
are
other
interested in,
districts.
But then we also
to make it work.
accommodate higher density
Okay.
developments closer into
The
Needham
core of the
Center
spine.
and the center at the Heights. And I mean,
And Chestnut possibly.
and yeah, and Chestnut, exactly.
But if that doesn't work to get us to the number, then you have to remove a little bit of general residential to remove the
Well, we
acreage.
can pop out a
Or-
couple of pieces of it, right?
Or reduce the minimum from 10,000 to.
Correct, to
Right.
8,000, right?
If you.
Keep
Yeah,
reducing
think of it that
until you get to a yes.
So we have a number of levers that we
That's if
can
it's
pull.
equitable.
I guess what I want to make sure of first is everyone comfortable with this plan? Like we have to nail down the details, and I know, Jean, that you still want to discuss 2 versus 3. But generally speaking, those 3 options, which are right now a little mushy, but we'll define better. Is everyone comfortable with this plan moving forward?
They're good parameters,
Yes.
yeah.
Okay,
Can I ask what the format of the January meeting is?
we need to talk about
That's
that.
what we're gonna talk about after this.
Settle in, because we're gonna be talking about that.
Well, the reason why I'm thinking that is, I think the format impacts a little bit the scenario, or how the scenarios are presented.
Yeah,
In what way?
So. I mean, I agree, it's, presenting all scenarios is not feasible. If we're presenting the maps and these tables with all the parameters. I mean, it's good to present that, but it's also overwhelming. Are we mainly asking for feedback on the geographic extent or all of these parameters as well?
well,
Think
personally,
I think
it's
everything.
my feeling that we're just gonna get feedback. Of all kinds.
I think it would be really helpful as we create as the presentation is created, to create the three scenarios next to each other at the beginning and say, big picture. We have minimum, whatever, partial, maximum, and these are just bullet points. These are the three differences, and then we can go into each individually, because it's a lot, and we're in the weeds, and it's still a lot for us.
Yeah, and I would say also that, to me, I think it seems really important to have the majority of this public forum be people coming up to the microphone and expressing their feelings. So I'm not entirely convinced that the three scenarios that we bring up are the things that are actually gonna be the focus of the public comment. I think people are just gonna have feelings that they need to share about pretty much everything under the sun with regard to zoning and housing. And I think we're gonna kind of have to just absorb it. It's not necessarily they're not necessarily gonna speak to these three maps. They're gonna speak to, their concerns, which is fine. But we still need to move forward.
The goal is to make it enticing enough or interesting enough for them to be able to comment on the things that we're talking about beyond their own individual.
And to make the differences
feelings.
obvious enough for them to have.
Right,
something to
I think we wanna say, we wanna hear your feedback, we need your feedback for us to be able to move forward, because the truth, right, is. But one question that I have for you, is it beneficial to show them in GR, what kind of housing in triple decker or townhouses, like just a visual of what's in town already, maybe we don't have triple deckers, but. And then show in the center district, there is a building already that's 3 stories, and there's one that's 4 stories, is this okay with you?
We're working on that right now.
I think the
Yeah,
visuals for that, because otherwise people are like, oh, we want 5 stories in general residential, you're like. No, you don't. Yeah, because I heard that a lot, that they wanted, and I don't think that they understood, they felt like if it wasn't as dense, but it was taller, they could live with it, but I don't think they understand that they don't want small, apartment buildings everywhere.
Yeah, we're
That's all.
working on that with Alex and Katie to
Yeah.
pull existing housing typologies that are in Needham today and share with folks. How tall is it? What's the density and some metrics around that? Because to the
And the
point,
Carter School being one of them, saying like, this is a corridor that has.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Would that be okay for these other locations?
I think one of the other things that is gonna come into play is, we're talking about number of stories. But the height, I think, becomes something that, not the, and there's a lot of information. Like a single family home, some of the residential is 35 feet to the peak of the roof, right? So when we're talking about, if people think of a 3-story building as 30 feet. 30, you're not gonna get 3 stories in 30 feet.
Right.
Especially if you're counting mechanical equipment and stuff like that on the top. So there's a lot of, and if you want retail, and I don't wanna. If you want retail, you need a lot more on the first.
Yeah.
So.
A lot more mechanical units.
All right, well, let's take this one step at a time. It sounds like we've got consensus that we're gonna bring the minimum map. Okay, and let's talk about what our middle ground map should be. There's some who want the scenario 3 map. Jean, you want to make your case for number 2?
Yes, I've got some very good news tonight, on the question of contiguity. Across Great Plain Avenue, connecting the Garden Street area, with the Denmark Lane area. And I think the reason we were saying, well, we need a crescent, we need something, is we didn't know where we would get that contiguity. But we have it right there. And so, as we were told tonight, so scenario 3 calls for rezoning a couple of blocks along Chestnut Street that are now used for the kind of businesses that we want in our downtown. I know, you've got Dedham Savings Bank on the corner, and then you've got Camilla's Restaurant, and then you've got the flower shop, and then you've got another little restaurant on the other end. And we're talking about taking that block and zoning it for a standalone multifamily. And we don't need to do it, as we found out. So why should we even present it? It wasn't presented it wasn't a part of the housing plan. It isn't our vision for that area of downtown. I just don't know why we do
So
that.
is your objection to scenario 3, the fact that it has that?
Yes,
Okay, so if scenario 3 didn't have that residential to the ground, you'd be okay with it?
well, I'm trying to see it, in what way scenario 3 differs. Otherwise, isn't it kind of the same as scenario?
Well, it has A1 also on Great Plain.
Yeah.
And then it has on the right-hand side, the Chestnut Street, it has also that center. That's also.
Oh,
kind of
the
magenta.
A1 is the church. I think that's the congregational church.
And the parking lot behind it all the way.
Yeah.
So it creates more density in the center. It was a hybrid of the center versus not doing anything at the center.
But scenario 2 has I'm a little concerned about including the Hillside School, but other than that, it's got the apartment areas up by Avery and Webster Green. It's got Hillside Avenue business. It's got, it just, it gives us probably a little bit more units than the basic, but it carries the whole thing right all the way down.
But I
to
think
the-
that's the point, Jane, is that it just gives us a little bit more than the basic. And what we're looking for is a real middle ground solution that gives us a bit more. Scenario 3 has higher density and more units.
It has higher density as well as more units.
Yeah.
It's 15.8.
Well, I suppose we did a different scenario 3 that didn't include
Does have
the
more units there,
rezoning
so-
along that Great Plain Ave. That's new.
Okay, and I just misspoke too, so it has
Yeah.
more units, but it has lower density.
If I may,
Yeah.
I think Gina and I have fundamentally different views on this. My view is I want to bring activity to the downtown. We had an extensive discussion about this at our last meeting, and I won't repeat everything I said. But I think it's important for economic reasons and political reasons, but just talking in terms of economics. The downtown needs vibrance. We've talked about how Chestnut Street hasn't been redeveloped because you have small parcels. We have the same problem with the downtown. Small parcels that left to their own will continue to be one-story buildings, outdated buildings, unable to attract tenants that might provide other services, and uses to the municipality. I think there's a lot of reasons to try and encourage activity downtown. So I actively want to include
Standalone multifamily.
yes, and the scenario in 3. So just different approaches.
I have to say, I think that Dean also wants to encourage lots of activity. It's just a different method.
Sure,
Yeah,
I'm not
It's a
trying to.
different strategy.
Yeah, mixed use is my vision,
Yeah.
not the standalone in that area. That's
Right.
all. That's the difference.
But the center also, doesn't it, have a requirement for mixed use?
The center now requires mixed
The
use.
center crawler.
Right.
The center crawler, the center
You
crawler,
mean now,
Right.
not.
I'm
on
sorry, I
this
don't
map.
understand the question, I guess.
Are you talking about the map or current zoning?
What
The
is
current zoning,
the current zoning only allows mixed use in the center.
correct. But there could be, we could do an overlay, or we could do something that would still require or would it just have to be standalone housing?
No, I think if with this change, you would have standalone housing at this proposed density. But you have an overlay there that would give you mixed use at a higher density.
Okay.
Which a developer may or may not use, right?
May or may
Exactly,
not,
person use.
may or may not.
You essentially end up giving them three options, right? They have the base zoning, they have the mixed use overlay zoning, they have the multifamily overlay zoning.
And it counts, the mixed use counts now. All the more reason, why rezone for standalone multifamily if the mixed use counts toward our goal. So,
With regards to mixed use, we haven't had a discussion yet about mixed use in any other districts other than downtown, so I presume that will be at a later point. We could incentivize mixed use in other areas as well.
Sure.
Good.
you mean,
Like the Chestnut Street corridor?
Sure.
you mean like every square?
As an example, yes.
Right. But we're not, but we're not, right, so.
We're
this
not
is
at that
something
I don't
we-
think we're at that stage
Yeah.
yet, especially,
So-
especially if we're talking about an overlay, like, Lee was talking about.
But I just want to be clear, like, especially for the public, that,
There are other opportunities there.
yeah, so it would allow by right, say, standalone residential, 100% residential, but I would like to see us incentivize mixed use in many of these locations as well.
Yeah.
And would that be by overlay?
So you have a couple of implications or a couple of things going on there. Yes, you could do that. You could absolutely do an overlay that allowed the mixed use as of right or with incentives, or as long as you allow the multifamily as of right, there are different things you can do with the mixed use. The interesting thing becomes when you go to approve that zoning, because if it is a housing only overlay, you can approve it with a 51% simple majority. If you're going to add other uses besides housing, it becomes a 2/3 vote. And so that needs to be, as you start thinking about how you want to do this, that should also be part of your discussions.
It's really important.
So we have to separate out if we.
So,
It's worth remembering, I know how much time many of you put into the housing plan, but I think there's the time to put it together, but also the time to separate it out and say, what do you want from the housing plan recommendations? What do you want to, or what should you accomplish within the MBTA zoning versus what are going to be other zoning changes, and becoming very clear about that, because I think you will, collectively, we would all get ourselves sort of in knots trying to make the MBTA work for everything. So I think you know that, but sometimes it's worth just stating that.
no, I think it's super important, especially because we don't want to complicate it and we want to make the right decisions for this, knowing that the Hersey was one of the items that we talked about that could be done in a different way, but I agree with you, there are opportunities, but again, we have to figure out what would work to move this forward.
Yeah, I'd like to talk about the mechanics offline.
Yes.
I think it's important in this case.
So should we take a vote on 2 versus 3?
Yeah, I think we need to vote on 2 versus 3, but with the understanding, that's not the final map, but we can tweak things. Correct, so like, let's, so I guess if you're in favor of scenario 2 being our middle ground, perhaps you could raise your hand. Jean? Okay, if you're.
You stuck there.
All right, if you're in favor of scenario 3 being our middle ground, raise your hand. Okay, and I see a bunch of hands, so scenario 3 will be our middle ground. So there weren't any other options that anyone wanted to raise, right, Liz? I didn't see you just try to, no,
Well,
you didn't have another middle ground that you wanted to.
no.
Okay. Thank you for this. Okay, so 3 is our middle ground.
Should we play with 3 and think
No.
about things like, should we get rid of?
We will
Hillside School?
eventually.
Not yet.
Not
Right.
yet. Okay.
Because remember, we're trying to get some feedback from the public.
Okay.
And to get into this before we hear from them, I mean, what if they hate us? We'll have
What
wasted
if they
all this
want to
time.
go with 1?
Right, exactly. So, okay, so let's talk about our maximal scenario. like all of the.
I don't think we
things.
have it yet. 'cause my-
No,
my
but let's
perspective.
talk
Right,
about
right,
what we
but I'm
want.
saying, right.
I would suggest that we start with scenario 6. That includes general residence. Eric, how can we do this? If we want to play with general residence and with density in the downtown, how do we come up with a district that is compliant enough for us to have confidence to take it to the public forum? Can you, I mean, like, you can't do this live, right?
Can we look at 6? 5 has no general.
It's just, yeah,
residential.
it's just GR, that's the difference.
Well, but if we want to tweak the density up in places,
I have in my notes that one of you mentioned dropping the lot size to 8,000. Yeah. mhm.
So there are 2 ways of doing it, right? It's decreasing the lot size and the other way is removing parts of the town. residential.
correct, you may have to do, well,
Or 3 ways.
There's really
Or
three
ways.
re-
There's
re-
three
Increase the height, yes.
And increase
okay,
the
there's
height.
4 ways. You can drop the minimum lot size, don't know. Maybe 7,500 might work, somewhere probably in that range. You're not gonna capture everything. But if you give me a floor, then I won't go below that, so I test that. You can increase the height,
On the height, I think the consensus might be that 2.5 stories is,
we still want it to fit in
High
with
enough.
residential.
I would agree with that,
I don't think we want to go over that.
I would agree with that.
So for changing height, would it be in the general residential only, or would you tweak it on in other areas?
Yeah, well, let's take. If we can we take one district at a time and just try to make decisions, because we've got 8 districts to talk about, and if we want to do this right now. The other option is you give us the leeway and we work with staff and we figure out something that works.
I'm comfortable with that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm actually comfortable with that too, but I think I'd love to hear from people what they feel like for general residents specifically, where we put the higher density. I think,
What could we live with for the other higher densities, what could we live with? Could we live with 5 stories? Probably not, most people probably wouldn't.
I would,
Or maybe in some areas, so I guess, if we can give them the parameters, then you can
Well-
work together, right?
May I ask or make a, just tell it, do we want to look at this
Right,
an individual levers with regard to height or FAR for lot coverage, or do we want to say we want X number of units per acre?
Tell me what your
Because that-
tax would be.
It'll make it easier. I think it's
Because then they
more
can
easy,
push it into
right,
place,
okay.
yeah, I
Just
think
give
that's
them
a great
leeway.
idea.
Yeah,
As you change each.
because we could do
parameter.
something that never gets us over.
Yeah.
If you have it with you.
right.
Does that make sense?
That was a
I
really
think they
good
missed it.
suggestion for those of you that didn't hear.
Mhm.
That the units per acre
What's that?
might be the way to go, and then they can
Yeah.
figure out what
They
makes
should have
sense
done it.
as a group
All right, go ahead.
versus us going line item by line item.
So you get-
So I think Eric could model some quick things just to see what it would do to drop lot size or drop. I don't know that we can finalize it, but at least if
You
it,
can see where. it
if a
goes.
lever really doesn't move the needle, we know that. And
The scenario 1 is 15 units per acre, scenario 3 is 15.8. Just to remind everyone.
The one thing I can't do on the fly, just because it's complicated. I have to split, the scenario 5 and 6 are split into 3 separate compliance models, because I can only model five districts at a time.
Oh my.
So we have to create summary sheets, that's why everything's in a summary sheet, but I can model GR just to see like, okay, hang on, how many are. All right, so for GR right now, it's set at, it's set at 10,000 square feet. So right now, there are 446 total parcels within everything that we've called GR. 140 of those, or 1/3, are currently non-conforming by lot size. So if we were just to go in and change, just for the sake of doing, let's say 7,500 square feet is our new floor. We now are at 57 parcels. We gained almost 100
Oh,
parcels by doing that. And that gets us. There must be something else holding GR back because it didn't change. It didn't do anything.
What else do you
What
have?
is
What's
so-
your zoning input summary for
What's up with
GR?
GR?
Yes, the problem child.
It's like, what does it, I mean,
Oh, it's probably your 4. Cause you're gonna change it, but you still have 4 units per acre. Take off the 4 per acre and see what happens. Oh, there you go.
Yep, that's the problem.
Yeah.
It's really the density. It's not the lot size. It's the 4 dwelling units an acre. That's the limitation.
If you made it 4 dwelling units per lot up at the top rather than per acre.
Yeah. Oops.
Yeah, see what that does. There you go.
Can you just point out to us where you're?
I will. I just want to get.
Yeah, that's logical.
I just want to turn it back to 10,000 and see like what.
Yeah,
what
then
that
take it back to 10,000, but at 4 per lot.
Doesn't really do anything. So it's
No.
good.
Yeah,
Okay, so the only change we made, kept it at 10,000 square feet for the minimum lot size. Instead of saying 4 dwelling units an acre, we said 4 units per parcel. So long as you have 10,000 square feet.
Okay, and so show me the bottom line here. There.
So the bottom line is, we went from like 213 units to 1,196
And an each.
and then 8.7 up from 1.5.
Okay.
So that's like 16 units per acre, right?
that's 16
Correct.
units per acre,
That's correct.
roughly, yeah. Mhm.
That seems
Well, because
more dense than other districts that we're considering, right?
all apartment.
Yep,
ones.
but that actually, that would only be if you had all the lots are at the smallest size.
But that shows one way that we could adjust it.
Right, so
So, I
remember,
mean,
this is
the,
just the maximalist version, not,
So
nobody's committed to this.
if with this change, we still need to get to up something to get to units, am I hearing that you want to have us up the height in the business districts
Yeah, like
to
Chestnut
get there,
Street.
Well, I
to
think,
get to a
well,
compliant district?
I think what we talked about was if we want to pose a target units per acre.
Yeah.
Rather than height specifically or FAR specifically. But if we can,
I think we should target 50. And it doesn't have to be 100% or uniform, but if we can employ enough 50 units per acre to bring our density count to the right place, I think that'll make a big difference, especially along Chestnut and then the business districts.
So I just want to understand the exercise. So we're taking this maximal geographic scope and trying to make it comply.
It's not just geographic, it's maximal.
it's the dimensional standards, right?
What?
Dimensional standards.
Yeah, we might-
No, but we're adjusting the dimensional standards to make this geographic scope fit.
Yes, exactly, right, because it doesn't comply now,
Right.
so, yeah. Sorry, I didn't hear the whole thing.
So by making, I just put it in the summary table, it looks like just off the fly, but putting in that 1,196 units and the density of 8.7, it brings the overall scenario 6 up to 13.5 dwelling units an acre, so
So totally doable.
we're not far away.
Yeah,
It may be small
Which actually
changes.
means we could maybe shift general residence down if necessary. I mean, I think we should take it to community forum
Sure.
like this, but it also means that we have some
you could go
space to
there.
back up if we need it.
Correct. Yeah, you might go from 4 to 3 units on a lot, right? Because that still would comply.
Right, what would that do, just out of curiosity?
Okay, but can we talk about that distinction on a lot versus on an acre? Because on a lot isn't our bar, right? On an acre is our bar.
it acts,
Doesn't matter.
yeah, so it acts as, basically, you're using it to act as a control. Right, and you're saying that we don't want any more than 4, basically 2 duplexes or a 4-family per acre, so rather than creating that control on a per acre basis, you're saying it's on a per lot basis. So, and you come in and say, it helps when you've got the smaller lots, basically, as act as a control.
The lots being 7,500 or 10,000?
Well, basically, I mean, what you had before is 4 units per acre. I'm not explaining it very well,
Because
yes,
not everyone has an acre. So the
exactly,
people who,
right,
there's an equivalent for people who have smaller lots now.
That's right. It's a
Yes.
fraction of 4.
exactly.
It's
Okay.
one per
Yeah.
acre, really, I mean, one per lot, if that's 10,000 or
Right,
11,000
exactly.
square feet, because 1 acre is 43,000.
And that's also part of the reason why we end up at that density of 1.5, because
Yeah,
if you have a
exactly.
bunch of 10,000 or 12,000, well, probably like a 15,000 square foot lot, you might end up with 1.5 units
Yes.
of actual capacity.
So you're still controlling it by limiting the number of units, but you're limiting the number of units on a lot basis rather than a generalized by acre basis. And in this case, to your point earlier, you actually increase the density because now at 4 units per lot, that lot might be an acre, that lot might be 10,000 square feet, that lot might be, 20,000 square feet. So you see the results there because some of the other things that we've changed. So what that tells me is you've got a wide distribution of lot sizes in there. That's throwing that off. But in some cases, by making it by making it the per lot, you are increasing the density for some of the lots and you're vastly decreasing it for others. So because your 2-acre lot, for example, which could have had 8 units on it at a 4 per acre, 4 units on it because it's set by lot. But your other ones, the density is going to go up because they were smaller lots. So,
So is the goal, if for number 1 and number 2, there were 15 or 15.7, so is that the goal for this one as well? So that they're all apples and
You
apples?
tell us,
Yeah, you tell
Yeah,
us.
you know,
Our
we're
minimum
hearing-
goal is
we're hearing
15.
50.
So.
we have to hit 15. Anything over that is,
right.
as fabulous as we want to make it, especially for this.
But not
iteration.
every
Right.
district has to hit 15.
Right.
Right, this is the math.
We have
So
to- but if
you
we
could stay
are-
at 13 or you could stay at, what is it, an 8 now for GR, but you have to go up on the others.
But if the GR is making it be at 8, let's say, getting to 15 is doubling it, right, practically. for
Well, I think the
16.
GR, with the GR, we're at 13 now, right?
Yeah,
13 and a half.
with the GR at 4
You're
units per
people
lot,
know.
we're at 13.5
Right.
overall.
I understand,
Yeah.
yeah, I mean, it's a balance, I understand, but I'm just saying that the balance of it, do you recommend that it be 15 or 16 in total, even some denser and?
That's policy truth.
I think it's a policy choice. I also think back to some comments that were made at the beginning. Like if your goal is to build housing, if your goal is to enable housing to be built by the private sector, you should think about what the private sector needs from a zoning perspective. Maybe that's 5 or 6 stories to build 100 units, 6 over or 5 over 1 building. That can support structured parking. I don't know. We've got developers here and we've got developers elsewhere in the community. Right? So 3 stories honestly probably doesn't get it done. I don't believe that gets it done.
Great.
I think 5 or 6 stories, absolutely, but then you have to weigh, is that palatable at town meeting? That's not a question I can answer.
And
but-
is it palatable depending on the district?
Yeah, totally.
Yeah.
Totally.
From my perspective, I think utilizing the general residential gives you flexibility to put density in other areas that make sense for development here.
Yeah,
Right.
I think that's how we should be looking at it.
Yeah.
I think it's selective.
But we also-
Not on mass. It's
Yeah,
selective.
definitely.
That's that fine tuning.
Definitely.
I'm wondering if we could put the map back up and if we're gonna get direction from you all where you wanna add that density, if maybe we could talk through what selective areas means to you.
That would be helpful for you when you're trying to.
I have a question about, the scenarios that, show both general residents and other. And I was just focused on industrial because I saw the lot area minimum of 20,000 square feet, and I thought, wait a minute, it's 10,000 square feet in industrial. And so I didn't understand why it was changed to 20,000. I just wanted to see that chart again that was up there just a
It's just,
flash ago.
for 5 and 6, it's just a reflection of where where the participants in the meeting said that they wanted it to be. So you're right, it is 10,000 today, but the feedback from the community was 20,000. That's the only reason why I changed it.
It was that they don't want this kind of development to occur unless it's a 20,000 square foot lot.
I think they were thinking that it would be easier to develop a bigger lot.
Oh, okay.
So,
I just didn't understand why that change was made.
Picking up on what someone else said about, I think more density towards the center. I mean, I think that's where we wanted to have less density for the general residents and more density.
I'd love to, personally, I'd love to see way more density on Chestnut Street.
Yes,
Yeah.
I agree.
Anybody not agree?
Well, on, just to be precise, on Chestnut Street, on the, I guess that would be the westerly side of the road.
No, on both sides.
For me. As a resident on the other side of the road, I think we'd have to be thoughtful about what density we're putting on the east side of the road, because you're butting up immediately against single family houses there. The other side, you have the buffer of the train. So I think they're one street, two different streets in very many ways.
That's also an area that's had a lot of flooding recently. And additional density always could have impacts on the water. Well,
So,
Wait, but
Yeah.
also it could ameliorate some of it.
You would have to do
I don't think
stormwater
that's
management.
Yeah, I don't think that's a,
Well, it should.
Yeah, I know, we've actually improved anything.
yeah.
Stormwater regulation.
Well, it would have to come up to current code.
but if there's more lot
stormwater management.
coverage.
You have to
but
put tanks
it's all
underground and
paved right
sustain
now,
it
and
within
you'd
the
have to,
site.
you'd have to put some infrastructure in place, but I think that would be part of the building process, and we have to assume that that's gonna happen, because we have building codes. I don't think that it's a reason not to develop an area.
I think we need to hear feedback on January on that.
I think building and from Mike, I mean, that's what I do, when you, no, seriously, when you build buildings now, you have to do things that you didn't have to do before for stormwater management. And so we have to capture it on site and release it slowly, so it will be an improvement. Now, it may not be redeveloped, so you might not see any improvements, but if it is redeveloped, it's a lot stricter than it used to be. So I know for sure that it would be better than what it is today.
Katie?
And just for context, we will, after the January meeting and when you all start narrowing down to one scenario, we will be talking with police, fire, DPW, schools about infrastructure, capacity, school
Yeah.
enrollment, all
Making
of
sure
those
that
things. So
everything's viable.
we can't do that for all this expansive of a list, but that absolutely will be part of our due diligence as we get more fine tuned.
And regardless, this is just a concept map. So there's no reason not to include that area on our concept map, because we're not actually zoning.
I'm just
No, but
making people aware of things that
No,
come up.
right.
Absolutely.
Well, for what you may be doing for density and height on Chestnut Street, let's keep it to the west side by the tracks for right now. Does that work?
I think,
I
yeah,
mean, we could do west, the east side too.
and we've zoned it historically that way.
Right.
I don't understand that decision. I would love to discuss that further. There's a commercial on
both sides.
both
Yeah, on
sides,
both
all the way down.
The difference is the abutters.
I know that the hospital, on the other side of the hospital, there are,
Sure.
but the hospitalism is like an example of an enormous complex. So given that that's there, if we're talking about something that actually doesn't abut, at least on this map, as the parcels are drawn out, I'm not understanding why we would exclude that area.
Well, no one was saying excluding, but in terms of selective density, Because it's on the map.
Well, because
but-
isn't there a nursing home right there?
Yeah, that's Briarwood
And
you're
that-
pointing to.
Yeah.
But if you look at Briarwood, it is on two of its sides, bumps up against single family housing. On two of its sides does not. And certainly bringing up the hospital has gone through its redevelopment. Part of the reason the newest building the hospital built is this unusual structure where it has a residential exterior.
Yeah.
And commercial, residential exterior on one side and commercial on the other, is because of conflict and discussions and tensions with the neighbors. And I mean, there's a lot of history of raw nerves. To be blunt. And so what I'm trying to articulate is on that side of the street, encouraging greater density, I think is going to be just creating a problem, and
Okay,
it needs problem.
yeah, well, I understand that, but I also think that, again, this is our biggest map. We can always walk it back.
Well,
So I'm just saying that as currently drawn, I would be okay with them making some choices about increased density, but if that is not the consensus of the group, then that's.
I don't have a problem with showing this map in January, but I do foresee many objections to it.
Sure.
And I think that's the point of.
Yeah, I mean, I
showing the
think we're
maximum
trying
that
to
you're gonna
to
provoke
provoke
back.
some.
Yeah.
I guess the question is, what could people live with in a corridor that you feel could have more density? Is it 4 stories, 5 stories? I think 6 stories seems like a lot, but
Because if we were to put something like, I can never remember what the address is, but the photography studio on the bottom floor,
Oh,
and the
yeah.
apartments above 50.
50 data.
50 Dedham. If we were to put something like 50 Dedham here, I think that would fit in.
Well, that's allowed there now.
Right,
Well, right, it just, no, I understand, but as a street goes, I mean, I think, these things build on each other, there's some momentum. I'm just saying that having some multifamily housing and.
but
Density would
it
work
certainly
there.
is slated for multifamily in this, and I'm not articulating an objection to that. But when we were talking about selective density, my thought was to go on the west side of the street, because that's where we've always zoned, we, the town, have always zoned the two sides of the street differently. And I'm
Okay.
trying to,
All right,
thinking, recommend following that pattern.
okay, but so the professionals will be
Can I
making
offer
this happen, so.
Highland Ave? Dunkin' Donuts up to the subway grounds, greater density.
So the business district in light pink.
Yep,
Mhm.
I'd be okay with that.
Can I ask a question about the apartment district like Rosemary Lake, which is already developed? That density of 18 units per acre, would people be interested in redevelopment and then at a higher density?
Yes,
I think so, yes.
it's existing another floor that,
The apartment area at Rosemary Lake, which is developed.
The big
Petrini's
development.
large development, but we're already not getting a full bang out of this, just because of where the lots are configured. The ownership is all fragmented.
are those condos? Or rent?
No, they're rentals.
I think they're rentals,
Rosemary Rig is a condo,
but maybe you know,
Ross-
with higher
Rosemary
density
Brook
there,
is-
they would be more interested in redeveloping it.
Jerry, did you have a question, a thought?
Yeah, just to clarify the ask. So as we talk about A1, for example, there's like 7 or 8 A1 sub-districts on the map. Are we talking about when we make a change, to make a change to all of them, or to make specific changes to them? Because trying to understand the level of detail and work that we need to do in a short period of time. Because I'm already at 3 compliance models. If we want to start differentiating between each A1 or splitting Chestnut Street, now I'm probably talking about, modeling 20 different districts for one.
Don't do that.
No.
Keep it simple because we're just presenting these, right?
But maybe that,
I'm just asking, I just want to know.
maybe that becomes part of the presentation that we were talking about earlier, and how that's, maybe we can get feedback on which A1 district people would prefer to see more move on density
Mhm.
and direct the conversation that way. Not directly, but
It's gonna be a conversation though at the community forum, so I'm wary of making decisions on the fly there.
Can I offer maybe an easy suggestion, but not, certainly not optimal?
Easy, but not optimal.
Well, like, so scenario 6, we're talking about maximal geographic extent. This is scenario 6.
Right.
We could show this acknowledging that the parameters are not compliant, but this is the geographic extent and asking for feedback on how we would want to increase density in certain areas to make it compliant, if that was desirable. And that would limit the amount of modeling that would have to be done also.
I think I would like to see some higher density. I would like to show a compliant map. I don't think that there's, I don't think. I just feel like going to a community forum with a non-compliant map, it's dangerous. Yeah.
Yeah, I agree.
So if we can find, I mean, if in this group right now, we could identify, specific districts so that Eric isn't modeling his part out until the community meeting. I think we can see how it turns out, but I feel sure that we'll reach compliance. I mean, I think it sounds like we have a lot of,
No,
it sounds like we have a lot of, because right now, it seems like if we went up to, say, 50 units per acre on the west side of Chestnut Street, we'd probably make our mark right now.
Sure.
If we include what Kevin just suggested, we're gonna be good. If we decide we want to include that specific A1 area, we're gonna be good. So I don't know that it's necessary to I think if we pick out generally the areas, if we're familiar with town where we think it would work, if everyone has general consensus, you could model just that.
Yeah, my question was just, out of all those gray A1 areas, are you going to be asking me to pick specific ones to change and leave the others the same? Or am I going to A1, all of them, and saying, going from 18 to 24, bam?
No.
Specific.
I think
No, I
just
think
the
we're
one
picking
by
out
Rosemary, right? Just the Rosemary right now, is
Just,
the only
yeah.
one that's been mentioned.
The Petrini, I should disclose that I, not only own a unit at Rosemary Ridge and live there, but I am on the board of trustees of Rosemary Ridge condominium. I try to avoid being involved in any discussion having to do with that particular parcel, because of that. I'm just not quite sure how I stand back and say, okay,
I don't have to vote on
oh, I can talk about this,
We'll raise hands and you can
but I
abstain.
did want to disclose that.
Yeah, but
So just to clarify on the model, so the way it's set up now, apartment 1 is one big block in the model, correct? So if you split those models up, if you split up and say, we'd like to apply 5 feet here and 4 feet here and 3 feet here, what happens is that, each of those will have to be redrawn separately, and they'll each get a different piece in the model. The model allows us to have 5 sub-districts or districts within each model. So the more of those you do, the more models we collectively have to have.
So why don't you just do the corridors for right now and see what number you get to, right? And leave the A1 as it is for right now.
Sure.
And the corridor being Chestnut, the center, right?
Yeah.
And up by the
Highland.
Dunkin' Donuts, Highland Ave.
that's.
Any others?
Well,
That's B. Right, right.
That's what it'd be. Yeah.
Well, earlier we had talked about 100 West Street.
yeah, right.
That's the
100
overlay
west.
Avery Square.
Sorry.
That's the overlay. at Avery
Yes,
Square.
yes, okay.
So with those, do you think we could get to a number that? Okay. But then it's tweaking, right? And then it's like discussing the
Well-
different A1s and all of that with.
Yeah, I mean, there's, I don't know the name of the development that's on the west side of Highland Ave. It's apartments.
just down from the fire station, like maybe
Yes,
next to the.
Webster Green.
Webster Green. I mean, I think there are a lot of
Across from Avery.
opportunities for developments that would be higher density, that would really fit in there, like that one, and then the, across the street, the,
Yes,
what's that, Avery?
Yes, Avery Square.
I mean, I.
So
personally
which
think that a lot
color
of
is that
those
on
could-
the
So Avery Square is like the burnt orange
burn
color up on the north side.
So I would look at all of those, right? And then. Again,
I think there, maybe you want to stay on the side of the,
on the left.
on the left side, I think it's the same issue that Ron's talking about along the.
That's a lot of
Okay.
residential.
You want to stay within the residential area, I think.
So I would
Follow
run
track.
those and see if you're. Where we need
I
to
think
be.
we'll be
and then-
well over where we need to be.
So just then, can I confirm, so we were just talking about the Avery Square and you were talking about staying along the tracks, is that within Avery Square? Because again, if you want to do sub-districts at this point, those are gonna have to be redrawn.
It's a
Yeah.
portion of Avery Square.
Yeah, exactly.
Right.
So if you're doing a portion of any district, just know it has to be redrawn. You're splitting it into two sub-districts, which means you're taking out two pieces of model. It's not that it can't be done, but we want you to know what implications that has in terms of the timing between now.
But that's a selling point to the public, to say we can fine tune this.
We can certainly fine tune this. The question is, does it make sense to fine tune it? I mean, this is the
Right.
question that I'm asking you all. Does it make sense to fine tune it now? Or let people know that it
No.
can be fine tuned
Yeah.
and fine tune it later?
Yeah, so I think
Later.
from what Emily's saying, I think the ask of this group is, are you comfortable if we keep the boundary districts the same on Chestnut Center, Business and Avery Square?
At the moment,
Keep the
yes.
boundaries the
Mhm.
same, add density to the whole thing to get the maximum scenario and then get feedback on that.
Sure.
Yes.
And when you add the density, are you aiming to hit 15, an average of 15?
You tell- you
units per
tell-
acre?
No,
15 plus.
we're adding 50 units per acre. And we'll see what it does to our, across the board, because we have to average it out with the.
Right, but the goal is that it's more than 15.
Yeah, that's the goal.
Because the other
So
ones
your
are
goal is
15,
to have the total average be 15.
No,
No,
more than 15.
more
I-
than 15.
I think we need some sort, see, I would like the three scenarios. As much, I think the geographic scope is what people are going to be focusing on. And so if we can, as much as possible, keep the density, the average density of the three similar.
The point of this
Yes.
is to talk about whether it's economically viable. There's a group of us at this table that believe that it's not gonna be economically viable unless the density is kicked up.
No, I'm not disagreeing about that, but what's the upper limit? What do you,
So we were talking about 50 units per acre.
in each of those four
So-
districts?
It was 22 when you didn't have general residential, and it was 8 when you had general residential. So I would assume it would be somewhere between 15 and.
Sorry, are you talking about the average, or are you talking about the density in those individual
I was
districts?
talking about units per acre. I'm sorry,
The
the
average.
Average.
But I
average.
think that average of 8 was just general residence.
Right.
Correct.
Kicked out.
Yeah.
As the unit density was kicked out, in just general residence. I don't think it was across the board.
Across the board is 13 something.
Yeah, across the board is 13. But
Well,
my
well,
feeling is, if we don't increase the
Change
density
that.
Right.
Oh, that's
to
fine.
50 units
For
per
the
acre, we're not
districts
gonna
that
get
they're
any
talking.
production.
No, just for the general residence.
Right.
In those particular areas.
Correct.
Areas, Only
Okay.
increasing those.
Which will then bring the overall average.
But it will
to
bring the
somewhere to
overage.
16 to 18, so.
So we were
Or
at
more.
9.6, so you have to increase density.
No, I understand, but, so it would be setting the units per acre at 50 in Avery, Chestnut, Central, and business, right?
Right.
So that would bring it, how very high.
Yeah, that's.
I can't imagine, like, if you have an idea what the average would be from that?
What about
I don't even know if it will be physically feasible to bring it up to 50. We'll have to test it.
Right.
Because you probably are gonna need height in order to get that.
Yeah.
Yes.
If the parcels are small, which, a lot of the parcels in the district are of a smaller size, that means you gotta go up.
Right, which means that should
So
be.
if we're capping it, if, the best thing to do would be to decide on what is the height you wanna cap at, because that probably will end up driving.
But the
A lot of our
density, yeah,
decisions.
completely.
Because we may not be at 5, so let's say it's 5 stories, for example, in those couple of districts we were just talking about, we may not be able to get to 50 units an acre at a 5-story building.
Right.
I don't know that, but we might not be
The
able. to.
comment was made earlier, and I agreed with it, that 6 is
Too much.
gonna be unpalatable.
Mhm.
5 may or may not
Five
be.
may or may not
But,
be.
so, yeah, your suggestion of 5.
I think you should do 5 because we can always go back to 4.
Oh, yeah, we can
Right.
always change it, you know, like I said, we're just trying to get feedback, so.
And we include this industrial district.
I can't see it. That's the upper side.
It would be all or none of the industrial districts, just for
Yeah.
our sanity right now.
Okay.
Oh, because there's so many. I
Uh,
would keep it out unless you're not getting a high density. right?
I don't think we're gonna need it.
Okay.
Yeah, but
I agree.
I mean, just
Eventually
for
we
for the
can.
future, like, it's a perfect place.
Eventually you can separate.
But we
it,
can
right
deal
now,
with that
I think it's
later.
big picture.
Okay.
So we're going to model a height of 5 stories for Chestnut Center Business in Avery. See what that does.
Right. And keep all of the general residential.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So is the goal that you're running all of this for, do we have a meeting? We have a meeting on January 4th, right?
Yes.
And that's what we're gonna discuss and then discuss the public meeting.
All right, so do we need to vote on this? Katie?
Sounds like there's consensus, but I would put it to the group if you feel like there's consensus. Or
there's consensus.
I think
I mean, you got
there's
commercial
consensus.
order, right?
Right, we have the 3 that we're gonna take.
Yeah.
2 as is, more or less,
Yeah, and
and then 1 that we just created.
nothing to it.
This has been great work, a lot.
we still have a lot more to
Do
get
we?
Well, but just
We're not
getting,
gonna attack it yet.
but getting to this level and then it's.
We're not done yet.
getting more and more refined, but
Settling.
having consensus is huge.
So, do we want to talk more about the strategy for the public meeting?
I think we should see what they come up with and maybe you can put together kind of a team set of how we could present it.
On the 4th.
We do have thoughts that I would love to share now, just
Yeah.
because
Oh,
January
okay.
4th, we have to finalize it, so
Yeah.
I don't want the first conversation to be in the meeting, you have to finalize it. It's so, we had talked about kind of some big picture guiding lights of people wanting just an open mic to give comment on anything, you know, as opposed to the charrette station, so.
Right.
We had talked about, opening the public meeting, having it be in person and hybrid again. Having a presentation on the 3 scenarios. Having a survey ready, available for people, they can fill out in the room or online. Where we'd be asking specific questions to get feedback, and we could talk about what feedback we want and what questions we want in that survey. But that would be happening, starting from when the meeting is on the 18th, but keeping that open for a period of time, potentially 2 weeks. So that anyone can watch the recording after, give us added feedback if they can't happen to come that night. But after the presentations on the 18th, really just opening up for public comment to all of you. So I think I envision you at the front of the room and people are speaking to you, giving their comment. I think it's worth a discussion if you want to just take that comment and say thank you and next one, as opposed to a back and forth with each person. I think you should decide that on the front end if you're going to engage with presenters, because there's logistical challenges and folks may have questions, but we certainly could note them down and get back to folks and all of that, as opposed to trying to answer those in the meeting. So just want.
And just to add to that, we talked about switching back and forth between who was online and allowing them to ask questions versus who's in the room, so we can make sure that everybody has the opportunity.
Yeah.
to ask a
Can I
question.
make a suggestion just in general? I don't think you should answer every question as it comes, but somebody should take down, because most of it, many other questions could be the same. Maybe at the end, say, these are the questions, a couple of answers to the questions right now.
Yeah.
Because there's nothing worse than just people talking and people just staring at them. And then never hearing anything that could be an easy question to answer and clarifying. So I would say that if there's a list of questions and there are some that we feel really comfortable answering there at the end, say, we heard this and this is, you know. At least it feels a little more transparent and open than just kind of being a blank face and saying, we'll get back to you.
Yeah, I was recently at a planning board meeting.
With us, yeah.
And there was the open mic and the people came to the microphone, and even though sometimes they weren't exactly, I think you were there too. Oh, you missed that one. And I mean, granted, some people are there to vent or to give, you know, whatever private issues or whatever, but a lot did have questions. And I feel that there should be an attempt made, if it's easy enough and somebody has the knowledge to answer that.
Sure.
Mhm.
Totally understand.
Time limit on people talking.
Definitely. Yeah, I mean, you
So
know,
that
to
we
the
can
extent
hear
that we
from
can
the
enforce it, yes.
Yeah, so that way we can hear from most people and also say if somebody's already said something, just say you agree with it and not go through it again so that we can hear a more diverse.
And I'll give my, everyone be nice to each other, please.
Yeah.
That's good.
I want to back up Liz with what she said, that if people ask questions.
Yeah.
We shouldn't be, I mean, we have consultants that can answer questions, where people have been involved. Like our chair, our our co-chairs can answer questions. I think the meeting I think you're speaking of is the one that had to do with the housing authority development.
Yeah.
Yes, I thought also that there were many things that were questions that were not answered. Many things were comments, and in which case you're gonna take the comment into consideration. There's not necessarily a response right then and there.
Yeah.
But I think we really should be careful to answer questions.
I think the point has definitely been taken, yeah.
And I think we can do better. We tend to not answer a lot and I think it makes people feel like we're not listening and we really are. So.
What other things do we need to sort out? Because I know that we have skipped an important part of this meeting and we have to go back to it. So consider yourselves pressed for time now. So what else do we need to decide right now about the community forum?
I think if there's general comfort with that framework, then we had been talking about coming to the January 4th meeting with the draft survey questions. What are we actually asking people and how are we soliciting their feedback? So I think the January 4th meeting will finalize that with all of you and finalize the scenarios. Like
You
finalize
come up
them.
with a typical survey that you usually use.
There's no typical survey, I'll just say that, but,
There has to be something that you use.
But sort
Yeah.
of specific feedback on the maps. that are
yeah, we
presented?
can, yeah,
Yeah,
exactly.
yeah. It's gonna be pointed questions in the survey,
Yeah.
so.
And we usually leave, or I usually leave when I build the surveys, an open-ended question at the end, so people can add their thoughts freely, but, we will have very pointed questions about, dimensional standards, geography, a couple of other things. We can put images into the survey, we can put tables into the survey, so, I use the Survey Monkey platform. And, you know, we can create QR codes, et cetera. So there's ways of tracking who's receiving it. We also usually put a little stuff at the end, of how did they hear about the survey, which, you know, what was it, did they watch the presentation, were they there, things like that. That will allow us as we go forward to understand how we're reaching people. And, we can then use that for the next round of outreach to them.
And to that point, actually, I want to make a note that our second Poem postcard is going out shortly and should be arriving to residents' houses on or about January 5th. So in advance of this next public meeting. So hopefully it will spur more attendance both in the room and online. So we can all look forward to receiving one of those.
All residents of Needham are getting the postcard.
Yeah.
And it looks great. So
Yeah. I mean, it's very similar to the first, you know, it looks similar, so hopefully people will recognize it. But that should hopefully prompt them to participate.
Can I ask a quick question? Can you do the survey live?
Well, we wanted to be extended out 2 weeks, so we wouldn't have answers if that's what you're talking
No, there was ways of doing surveys live that you could do it on Zoom and you can do it on your phone.
Oh,
and
yeah.
Answer questions. Do you have that capacity or?
I
Oh,
will,
Artie says the video has disappeared from the meeting we made that a while ago. Sorry. Is it still?
okay, yeah, I think that was a while ago. Thank you. I will check to see what capacity.
I don't know if it's too much. I'm just
Yeah.
wondering, because those are really interesting when you get everyone to.
Well, so if people, it'll depend on how we do the hybrid and all that, right? But
Right.
if people are entering their responses at the meeting, I can see the responses
That's
coming
what
in.
I'm saying.
Yeah.
That would be really interesting to say, what do you think about, because.
You're talking about the polling questions. We can
polling
do that in the Zoom.
Mhm.
There are a couple of platforms we could use where people in the room could do it. You run into issues of equity because you have to
Right.
have smartphones to do it. So the people who are in the room that don't have smartphones won't be able to participate. So that becomes an interesting question of how we would deal with that. But yeah, there are some ways that we could do about that.
I just think that's fascinating when you see all the numbers moving and everything.
Yeah.
All right, I want to bring everyone's attention back to Eric and Emily to review our alternative affordability percentage threshold analysis.
That's the next one on the agenda. Okay.
Yeah, we sort of shot past it, but
I'll do this one first.
yeah, did I miss one? I did.
You may not.
Sorry.
No, no. Never mind. Okay, EFA. Does everyone remember what the EFA, why we need to do it?
Yes, it's,
Okay, great.
the guidelines say
Well,
10%
just in case-
unless
just in
you
case
have
the
this
folks
study.
Watching, don't remember, maybe I
Right.
can say that.
Okay, the EFA, the economic feasibility analysis has to be done according to the MBTA guidelines for any community that wishes to have inclusionary zoning in their community. If you don't know what inclusionary zoning is, it is a set aside within a multifamily housing or a residential development. Typically over a certain number of units, say it's over 10 units. So if you have a 100-unit development, it's over 10 units, you would trigger the community's inclusionary zoning. In Needham, it requires you today in certain districts to set aside 12.5% of those, say, 100 units. So that'd be 12.5, but we round up to say 13. So 13 of those units would have to be deed restricted affordable to 80 households earning a maximum of 80% of the area median income. Within the MBTA guidelines, they have sort of set a ceiling for inclusionary zoning thresholds. The MBTA communities cannot go above 10% of the total units, and they can't go below 80% of the area median income for the income restrictions on those units. They created an exception to that through the guidelines, which is called the economic feasibility analysis, which essentially is a glorified development pro forma analysis that a developer would do. I'll admit it may not be as detailed or as fancy as someone making a real financial decision, but I hope it's close enough. The state has said it's close enough, so that's good news. But we effectively see in the model if Needham were to go from 12.5, say up to the maximum that MBTA communities will allow, which is 20%, 80% of AMI, does that have an impact on different types of development that are envisioned through the zoning and MBTA effort that we're going through? Does it have a negative financial impact such that the development isn't actually financially viable? So that's what we're testing for, is to say, at what point can we, at what threshold can we increase or increase at all the inclusionary zoning, say from where it is at 12.5% to something more than that, before it triggers a particular development to become financially infeasible or not feasible. So that was the exercise that we went through. At RKG, we worked with housing and livable communities to develop the guidelines for the EFA. And we've also built a model that we've been using in many communities around the Commonwealth that have asked for EFAs to be done. So that's essentially what we did. I just have this up here, so when we post the presentation, there's some more information there. I will say just some caveats for the EFA model. HLC requires us to run the EFA model on using the zoning that's envisioned in the MBTA compliance model. So all the zoning parameters that we just went over for, say, like the housing plan scenario, for example, right, where we're limiting to, say, no more than 4 stories, and the parking is 1 space per unit. And we have the number of units that can be supported on the lot based on the build out from the compliance model. We have to use what's in the compliance model in the EFA. That's basically the input from a zoning perspective and a build out perspective into the EFA. So those two things match. It also prevents people from trying to use a loophole, like say your zoning allowed 6 stories and that triggers a stick over podium building. But you say, well, technically you could build a 3-story, so let's just run a 3-story, right? They're like, no, you can't do that. You got to run the maximum height and density and everything through this model, so we know what works and doesn't work. The other thing I would say is this is a point in time analysis of development feasibility. Interest rates that are at an all-time high, insurance rates are at an all-time high, construction costs, I imagine, are at near an all-time high. Land values are constantly adjusting to the new market. Cap rates are constantly adjusting to the market. And rents, and we've been tracking this, rents, I think, on the luxury level are tapped out right now. And we're starting to see a leveling off in the last few months, which is something we haven't seen in a while. Rents have been continuing to go up. So again, this is a point in time analysis. Next year, the landscape could look totally different. Interest rates might go down by the 3 adjustments they're talking about making next year. Construction costs could come down. So anyway, I just want to say that it's a point in time analysis. We can talk about the inputs, but that's kind of what we're doing. The other thing I would say for Needham is because, at least as we're envisioning the zoning right now, the maximum height is 4 stories. So we assume wood frame construction at 4 stories and below, not stick over podium. We tend to see a stick over podium at 5 and 6 stories, steel frame at 7 and above. That's an assumption that we made. If you disagree with that, we can change it. But there's a significant cost difference on the construction side between a stick built building and a stick over podium built building, to the tune of maybe $80 to $100 a square foot in cost. There's also assumptions in here on parking. A surface parking lot might be about $8,000 or $10,000 a space. A structured parking could be $35,000 to $50,000 a space, or maybe more. So the assumptions that we make in here, again, we can tweak them, but I just want everyone to know, when you see that we're going to say things are going to work at 20%, take that with a grain of salt, and I'll explain why, because I don't actually think that's what the town should do, but that's not my decision. It's just my opinion. These are just, we put these in here in case, anyone here in the public want to look at it. This is the key assumptions that go into the EFA model, basically into the pro forma model, and the sources from which we have collected that information. So as I mentioned before, you can see in the middle where it says hard construction costs. That's what I mean. If we go with a commercial stick built, we're at $275 a square foot hard costs. If we go to a podium, we're basically jumping up $70 a square foot. So it's a really big difference. These numbers, it kind of depends on the community and what developers you talk to. Some developers might say it's at 375, some might say it's at 350. We have it at 335 based on information from RS Means for the sort of Needham specific region. Again, if those numbers go up, feasibility comes down. If those numbers come down, feasibility comes up. So, and I would say very small percentage changes to things like rent and construction costs have big swings in feasibility, because you're multiplying that, say, 265 square feet over the size of a fairly big building. So if you were to go from 265 to 285, it seems like a small swing dollar wise, but it has a huge impact when you're multiplying that across the whole building. So I think these numbers, are good.
When did you get these numbers? What year? Was it from this year?
Right now.
Right now?
Yep.
We're seeing them a lot higher. They're just so one that But if this is what you're seeing, I'm just letting you know, we're seeing ridiculous numbers.
Where though? In the suburbs?
All over, yeah. Everything's changing every day. So.
Yeah, I know. So that's why I say we can sensitivity test this as well.
Michael has to see.
Michael,
Can you hear me now?
No.
not hearing you.
Still not working on
He's muted.
He's muted.
You're muted now. Right.
Does this work?
Is there a speaker?
Is the owl on? Check the volume on that.
Does this work?
There's lights on, so it looks like it's on.
Yeah, but is the volume.
Never mind.
Unmute, we can hear you.
Oh, were you able to?
Yes.
Yeah. Oh, okay. Yeah, I had a question about where the land acquisition comes from, because that seems really, really low to me. I know houses are getting $1 million for a 1/4 acre lot just to be torn down. So the 50,000 seems awfully low.
That comes directly from the town's assessment data for land on Modera and the Kendrick as recent examples of multifamily. I would say 50,000 is in the range of what we typically see.
Just clarify, that's per unit.
Per
not
unit,
per-
yeah, not for a
per-
lot,
yeah,
no,
yeah.
that's on a per unit basis.
So it's $900,000 per acre, if they're 18 units per acre.
No, I understand that. It's just we were talking about, like, let's say 18 units per acre. And if, it just seemed like, finding an acre for $900,000 would seem like a challenge to me. But if this is what it is.
All right, well, let's use these assumptions for the moment.
And then we have rent assumptions, so these are all market comps that come from CoStar and apartments.com, which CoStar owns. These rent comps come mostly from Modera and Kendrick. They're broken down on a per square foot basis for studios 1s, 2s, and 3s, so everything that we're testing in the model. The other assumptions are just financial. We also assume parking revenue. If it's a surface space, we assume $50. If it's structured, $150. Those might be a little bit low, but it does add revenue into the development side. And then we have all of our financing assumptions. For the financing, for the return expectations, which is how we gauge whether a development is financially viable or not. We measure that 3 different ways: the internal rate of return, which measures the rate of return over a 10-year hold period, and then return on cost and cash on cash. The 15% is sort of typical in the market. Return on cost and cash on cash are ones that are there again, they're fluctuating every day. We've heard return on costs going up as high as 6.5. Recently, I was in a meeting, but 6 to 6.5 seems to be, I think, where it's landing. Again, when you see the results, whether it's 6 or 6.5, doesn't really matter, at least for this, because we're measuring it at stick cost. So for the scenarios that we ran, if you look across the top table, those are the 5 scenarios. So we ran a 6-unit building because that is right now the threshold for triggering inclusionary zoning. And the EFA requirement is you have to run a minimal scenario. And then just looking across the districts, we picked sort of generic unit counts that seem to kind of fit within what might be viable in certain districts. So we picked a 25, 50, 100, and 200 unit on those, with a parking ratio of 1, because that's what we were testing in the model. The parking assumptions, as the building gets bigger, we assume that it might be more difficult to surface park, say, 100 or 200 unit building, just given the size of the parcels that we're dealing with. So there we have inputs for structured parking. So the parking cost jumps from like 8,000 to 35,000 a space. For the inclusionary zoning scenarios, we ran different assumptions. Just for the heck of it, we ran 10%, 80%. I know that's below what you have now, but that's sort of the minimum that's allowed under MBTA. And we ran 12.5, 15, 17.5, and 20. We sort of ramped it up in basically in 2.5% increments. And wherever there was a fraction above 0.5, because sometimes when you multiply 7.5 times 39 units or some odd thing, you're gonna get a fraction. So anything that's 0.5 and above gets rounded up. I believe that's the way the inclusionary zoning is written today. So once we run these different scenarios, both the inclusionary zoning percentages as well as the unit amounts through the model, we just measured it against the internal rate of return, the return on cost, and the cash on cash. So you can see, as I mentioned, you know, they're all hovering around 20% IRR, which is really high, but it's because the rents are so high in Needham. And if we're measuring that against stick construction cost, that's why you have such a big delta there. Again, if we change that to stick over podium, or we increase the construction costs or whatever, these numbers will come down. Same with cash on cash. So our threshold was 5.5. Here we're in the 6s and 7s. And then return on cost, 6 to 6.5 is kind of, I think today's market expectations were in the 7s. We ran a couple of scenarios, just because I thought the question might come up, for a stick over podium, like a 5-story building. And the IRRs dropped to about 14 to like 13.5 to 14. In our experience in some markets, I don't know about, you know, today it's just such a crazy environment, but 12.5 a lot of times in the suburbs sort of used to be kind of acceptable. Now I don't really think that is, but if we're at 13.5 to say a 14 range, like I don't know if developers would consider that borderline, or if they're saying like, nope, 15, we got to hit that 15. So that might be interesting feedback just to get if we have an opportunity. Or if anyone around the table has thoughts on that.
Who's taking 15?
The private developers who are looking to make the deals.
They want 15% of the units to be affordable?
No, they're asking for a 15% rate of return.
Oh.
They want 0% probably to be affordable. At least if I was a developer.
All right, well, all eyes then turn to our developer.
Sure.
Got some thoughts you want to share?
So you would never in a real market ever see, I shouldn't say no, I never say never, but you wouldn't, let me say this differently. When, as a developer, when you look at a piece of property or any project, right, you're on the ground up, if you're good at what you do, you should know what the cost of construction is gonna be. You should know what it's gonna cost to run the property, design the property, what your return thresholds are gonna be. The only variable that comes out of that equation is the land price. So if I could do deals at 7, I'd do them all day long. They don't exist because somebody's gonna pay more money for the land, because that's the only variable. So the market, I agree, the market is 6 to 6.5 on a return on cost basis. IRR isn't used as much anymore.
Yeah.
It's really cash on cash and return on cost. The return on cost doesn't take into account interest rate, right? So it really becomes your cash on cash. So I think everything we're talking about here is right. I mean, we can talk about the inputs and that type of stuff, but the more affordability that you require within the project, the lower the land price is gonna be. And the lower the land price is gonna be, the less likely it's going to be transacted. Because if you have a retail or, you know, some type of income producing property, you're weighing selling your property versus the income that you're getting in place. Where somebody is willing to pay you for that. So that's how I would look at it as a developer. And as a land seller. Like if I can put a 5 cares on a retail, like a 5 and a 6 cap on a retail investment today, and I can sell my property for 5 million, or I can sell it to a developer who's offering me 4 million. I'm gonna keep it retail. I'm not gonna create housing. To create housing, I'm gonna do whatever's better for the bottom line. So I think that's where this comes into play. So I think the numbers, I don't disagree, I mean, without studying them, I think the inputs and the assumptions are, could be tweaked,
Yeah.
but it comes down to creation of housing. Needham does have the luxury of being, well above the 40B threshold, 4.5%. So, some towns will look to drive affordable to get over that threshold. I will tell you this, Kendrick was $72,000 ago, and that was inclusive of all of the affordable. And that was
How many years
8
ago?
years ago.
Yeah.
So I think the structured parking versus surface parking is also, because you don't get that much more rent. Like, because you have structured parking or. Right, the rent's gonna be the same. Possibly. Agree.
A question about the podium. My understanding is, you need a podium, if, like, you're gonna have mixed use, because the ground floor that has the commercial has to be a podium, and then you could stick a build on top of it. Is that where it works? Or why would one ever have a podium if you were just having, multi-family, 5 stories or less?
I would say sometimes it's the parking. Yeah.
Oh.
Katie,
just process wise, I think, we're not at a decision point for picking a percentage, but we were grappling with the value of asking an explicit question to the public about a percentage, and it's really tough without context. So I guess I'm curious from this group, because January is the time we would get that feedback if we were going to. Would you like us to ask a question that says, we're considering range of percentage of affordability, the trade-off is more units versus less likely to be built at all, like give just some one-line context? Or do you think that that would not produce valuable feedback and we should just see if it comes up in the qualitative comments that happen at the mic?
The first thing I want to do is present the good news. The good news is 12.5%. They run it through the system. It works. That's what we've been wanting. In the new zones that we've done in the past 15 years, there's a chart in this report, the housing plan, that explains every single district and what the requirement is for affordability. It's right in the housing plan. In fact, maybe we could send it out, that separate chart, send it out to the folks on this committee, so you have it in hand. The zoning districts that were created more than like 15 years ago had 10% as the affordability. And then every time we were rezoning someplace recently, we made it 12.5%. And the goal was to bring up every district in town to the 12.5%. And it's easy to explain, you have an 8-unit building, one of them has to be affordable. And it begins also, as you know, from studying it at 6 units, and you have to, if you have a 6-unit building, you also have to provide one. But just to present that as the good news, and then say, and we were surprised to learn that we have an opportunity to seek and still comply with the MBTA communities guidelines per the study to go up to 15%. Is that what people would like to do? And
But Gina, I think that's affordability versus they're talking about the feasibility of the market, right? And then the profitability. Is that what you're asking?
I'm asking, at some point, this group will make a recommendation about this, the inclusionary zoning percentage, which, is it 10, 12.5, 15, 7.5? Is there any specific question you would want us to ask the public for the January meeting that would help inform you in making that decision? Beyond just what you hear at the microphone from folks who are caring about this issue, and they will come to you with their thoughts.
My own 2 cents is it's a little early, I think, to ask that in January, because in my mind, part of that is going to be what scenario, once we've come to a scenario that we have some consensus about, my own thought is we calculate at that point, because one of the, let's assume that our goal is to keep our 10% for 40B purposes, which is now 12.5. There's a lot of math that's gonna go into that in terms of, particularly with the general residence districts, and assumptions of how many units of those are going to be new housing and are not gonna be affordable. My own thought is I think it's just a little early to ask that question at this point, because my own views, I don't have a view at this point, because I think it's too early to formulate a view, because I don't know where we're gonna be in a couple months. That's my 2 cents.
I had assumed that was a planning board decision, actually, that the planning board sets a policy for how much affordable housing they want in certain areas.
It has to be approved by town meeting.
No, I understand.
Part of the MBTA compliance.
And being compliant, yeah.
But I guess my understanding is that the current 12.5 is compliant.
In the report.
As it's run today, yeah. As it's
Yeah,
run
I-
today.
It's, sorry, just to be, 10% is the requirement. You have to get above the 10%, you need to
No.
prove.
10% is the
10% is the maximum. that you can
There's
do.
no
maximum
requirement.
unless
No,
it's
yeah, but
proven to be feasible.
Right,
At higher.
yeah, you're not required to do affordable.
We don't have
housing.
any minimum.
Yeah.
So the maximum is 10 unless you can prove it out. through-
Yeah,
Yeah,
and
So we have.
I'm actually not sure that I heard the outcome of this report the same way that you did either. I think that delaying, like, focusing on one thing at a time is probably a better plan for the public forum. Because whatever we choose, I think it's gonna apply uniformly to the entire thing later, right?
That's,
Maybe the-
right? Like, that's how.
Which was the final district.
Except that when the overlay is done for the for the
Yeah,
MBTA,
well,
the
yeah,
community
yeah.
act, they'll be making a decision about what the affordable provision will be.
Maybe I'm confused with the general process. Like, we're making recommendations to the planning board, and then the planning board, are they gonna take it all right off the whole cloth, and bring it to town meeting?
I'm just
or-
asking.
This committee will make recommendations, the planning board then will carry it forward.
Right. But we put the package together.
So there's nothing the planning board is going to add or adjust to what we recommend.
Well,
I
do have a comment in that there's a misconception in the public that this whole MBTA, and I hear it from my patients, because that's a big discussion point these days, that and COVID. A lot of people are under the misconception that this MBTA Communities Act is a way to put in a lot of affordable housing. And I assume the residents of Needham may also be under the same false assumption. So I think when there is the next public meeting, one of you needs to debunk this assumption and really state what is
Good point.
expected of the Communities Act.
Yeah, we tried to make that crystal clear in the first presentation,
did, I remember.
but we're happy to reiterate it
Yeah,
again.
please
I
do.
think we may have to, it's because that's every community we work in, that is a very common assumption, so.
Right.
Kevin.
I also think when you ask a question about the percentage of affordable housing, don't ask as a pie in the sky wish. It should be, do you want development to happen, or do you want, affordable housing? Because,
It's sounding like maybe not asking the question at all
At all
is
might
where
be
we're
too.
leaning
okay,
and wait till we get
At
further
least
down
right
the
now.
process.
We do have
Yeah.
a third
Maybe,
forum.
yeah.
And there are other ways to collect public input aside from a forum. But it seems to me like we have much more fundamental questions right now, and we have to make sure that it works. And I'm afraid that if we go to a public meeting right now, it'll sound like we're promising something. But we don't know if we can deliver yet, because we haven't even picked a map.
But there has to be, and also there has to be the feasibility for it, because if you design all of this and no one ever builds it, then what's the point of this whole thing, right?
But we were talking earlier, but if people ask questions and we know the answer, we should answer the question. And there may very well be a question about affordability. And I think to answer it and say, we have had the appropriate studies done that are required, and it does show. That would be,
But
that would be the answer.
well, I don't agree with you that this is necessarily. But first of all, we talked about it being a snapshot in time. And we're way out from passing this at town meeting. So I think to call this the result is not accurate.
Really?
We also
Not
know
yet.
that there's an issue with the cost of land in this analysis, because that seems to be the consensus that I'm hearing anyway. So I don't know if I'm just hearing it differently. But I think before we even get to that point, I do want to clarify what Josh is saying. The question I think you're asking are we putting together a package that includes a level, potentially includes a level of inclusionary zoning and all the zoning that goes with it, including parking and whatever else. And we are passing it through the compliance model. We are getting it approved by the state, and then we're passing it to the planning board to move forward. Because I think it's important for us to know what variables we actually are moving forward.
Yes, so I guess a process comment and a
Yeah.
content comment, so. Inclusionary zoning, if the town wants to include anything about it in this model, in this zoning, has to be compliant with the state, so it does have to be part of the package. Unless you wanted to make a decision that you wanted it to be somewhere between 0 and 10.
Right.
So because we're already at 12.5 in some areas, I think it's a policy question for you all, but if you want it to be higher than 10, this group should make a recommendation on it, because you're making a recommendation on a whole package that goes to the state.
Right. And all of this work has to be done by March, is that correct?
April, March is the last public meeting, and so we're really gonna be tailoring it, you know. March, what people see in March is not going to change a lot from the final version.
So it would be helpful because we have only so many meetings before then, is to kind of like we should kind of map out what decisions need to be made, when they need to be made, and what information do we need to do that.
Yeah.
So that we can look at it holistically, otherwise.
We can update the original timeline.
Yeah.
I mean, I think our original timeline did some of that, but obviously it's
But it didn't have the
Iterative.
details of like, if you want to include the inclusionary zoning of this, we need to know by this time, right? Or otherwise you can't run all the models and you can't get the numbers.
Yes, yeah, and we've been.
We just don't want to
kinda doing
hold
that
you
long
back.
enough.
So
That's why we come to every meeting and say, we need these things from you, and we need those things from
But if we
you.
go a little forward, so that like we can work backwards a little bit and then we can be prepared, that would be
Yes.
better, yeah.
We do that.
And this is like an amazing amount of work, so we thank you for all of this, we're just picking at things, but.
That's why we're here.
Great job.
That's why we're here. Okay, last piece, the fiscal impact analysis. So the fiscal impact analysis, if you're not familiar with what that is, or you've never seen one before, to boil it all the way down, it essentially measures the gross property taxes of a hypothetical development scenario, and the municipal costs and the school costs that would be associated with serving the people who would live in that development. You take the property tax generation, which is your revenue side, you subtract the municipal costs and the school cost side, and you get your fiscal impact. If the revenue outweighs the costs, the fiscal impact is positive to the town. If the costs outweigh the revenue, it's a negative drain to the town. So at its most basic, that's what we did. You see, it's a lot more complicated than that, so I'll walk through the different assumptions that we used. I'll also say, because of the timeline, we've not had a chance to sit with department heads, finance, schools. We've gotten their input on some of the inputs that you see, but they haven't seen these results yet. We are going to find a time in the new year, shortly in the new year, in early January, try and sit with them and go over this, just to make sure that everybody's on the same page, who ultimately will probably have to sign off on this. So there's a bunch of model assumptions, but the biggest ones are gonna be things like the town's tax rate, because that drives the property taxes. multifamily valuation. So this is based on costs that we researched from a whole bunch of different sources. Existing property values and taxes in the town, using those as comps. What the development program will be. In the case of the development program, that is all coming directly from the compliance unit, compliance model. All the unit counts are coming directly from that for each of the districts. I'll show you what those tables look like. Then we have to calculate the cost side. So we go, Davidson, thank you, provided me with the town's budget spreadsheets. I will say that we weren't provided with a line item by line item budget spreadsheet for every single department in the town. We do get those a lot of times, and we go through them with a fine-tooth comb and essentially look at what we call fixed costs versus variable or incremental costs. In this case, we were given line item budgets for each department, but they were lumped into staffing costs versus expenses. So that's what we're given for every department in the community, and that's what we used for the fiscal impact model. And that's totally fine. David said that's totally fine. Obviously, we need to share this with them, but that's what we used. We take all of the different departments in the town and we sort of categorize them. So the smallest categories are police is a separate category, fire is a separate category, schools is a separate category, and public works is a separate category. Everything else that's sort of like the day-to-day functionality of like town hall, we've lumped into general government. So that's going to be everything from the planning department to the finance department to the assessor to the library to parks and rec. They all get lumped into the general government category. They all are broken out. If you want to see them, I could show them, just let me know. But that's how we put it together. So I'll walk through the assumptions that we use in the model. So the first is we have to somehow come up with a valuation estimate for future development. And we do that using what's called a cost approach. Typically, as a building is being built, let's say it's a 2-year construction period for a larger multifamily, the assessor will come in as that building's being built, say at the end of year 1. And because there is no one living there and there's no income being generated by rent from that property, the assessor has to assign a value to that. So they typically will look at a per square foot construction cost or a cost, and they'll multiply it sort of by the square footage of the building, and they'll come up with a value that way. So that's what we did here. So we have typical gross square feet per unit for studios, 1s, 2s, and 3s, which you can see here, which we've kind of pulled from market comps, and then a per square foot cost for the development of those. I kind of use something between stick and podium for right now at $300 a square foot. You multiply those two. So that's how we get our assessed value per unit on a per unit basis. What we then do is, let's say in District 1, the build out is 100 units. Obviously that's not the right number, but let's say for simple math, it's 100 units. We have to figure out across that 100 units, like what is the total valuation of that 100 units from a valuation standpoint. So what we do is we assume that 100 units is going to be broken down somehow into studios, 1s, 2s, and 3s. So we use 10% studios, 45% 1s, 35% 2s, and 10% 3s as a typical breakdown. I know in communities that can vary, but that's kind of what we see typically in the market. So we multiply all these costs times that unit breakdown. That gives us a total valuation of that 100 units, right? So let's say that was like, what would be an easy number? I don't know, $1,000. You would then divide that by 1,000. That gives you your assessed, and then you multiply that by the tax rate, and that gives you your property taxes. 1,000 was a really bad example. Sorry, it's getting late. So this is essentially the way that the fiscal impact model will work. We have inputs. So that's everything we just talked about. We have multipliers, which I can go over. So we need things like student multipliers. How many kids are going to come out of these developments? That comes directly fortunately from the school department, gave us a lot of good data on that, on existing multifamily units in town. We need the tax rates as our multiplier. Incremental costs I'll talk about in a little bit. We also need to be able to take all those costs, and we have to figure out like how much cost does one single housing unit generate. So we need to be able to figure that out on a household basis. We use the town's current household housing unit count to do that as a multiplier. So as I said before, our outputs are gonna be our new net tax receipts from property taxes. I did calculate other fees and revenues being CPA funding, and vehicle excise tax. So I do have those numbers in there because those are additional revenues that would come to the town from new residential development outside of property taxes. Then we subtract the municipal costs and the school costs, and that's how we get the net fiscal impact.
So if we make a decision about mixed use, this would have to be adjusted for the commercial tax rate as well.
We could model mixed use. I have a commercial component built into the model. I just didn't use it for this,
Okay.
for tonight, but we could do that.
One other just quick question, is Needham basing the tax on revenue or on cost? I thought it was on revenue.
Once
Once
it's,
it's built.
once it's built and operating and generating income, yeah, then it would be on a cost basis.
It would be on a revenue
Revenue,
basis.
I think you-
Income-based approach is called,
Yes.
yeah, income-based approach. Okay, so just starting off with the municipal cost side of things. We have to take, and all the budgets I'm gonna share are general fund budgets, so they're absent of state aid, they're absent of grants, all those kinds of things, just what goes to the general fund. So we got the FY 24 budget, broke it down into the categories of general government, police, fire, public works, and other. The other category are things like unemployment insurance, debt service, retirement funds, insurance. We don't typically see those fluctuate with a new housing unit, so we bucket those in other. But just to show you that that is part of the budget. So what we did with the line item budget that we had and the type of model that we build incremental cost models. We don't build average cost models because I think average cost overestimates the cost. So we build what's called an incremental cost model, which looks at the budget, the town's budget, and it says what costs on an annual basis for each of these departments is likely to increase with one additional new housing unit. Which ones are not likely to increase with the additional housing unit. We go line by line and we identify fixed costs, which are not likely to increase, and what we call incremental or variable costs, which we do believe. An example of that would be the police department. Even if we added probably 1,000 new housing units, you would never hire another police chief. You'd have one police chief. But you probably will hire additional patrol officers. You will need cars, you will need equipment, you will need computers, you will need all that kind of stuff. So on the expense side of the budget, which is how we were provided staff and expenses, we're basically taking 100% of expenses because those are all things like copying and equipment and things that are probably likely to go up as we add additional residents to the community. But on the staffing side, some of those costs will go up. Your patrol officer or your line firefighter or your teacher will go up, but you're probably not gonna hire another chief assessor or another town manager, or sort of the folks who are at the top of the pyramid most often and are most expensive. So what we did line item by line item is we identified what the incremental share of the budget is, which is the sort of, I guess, the third column in the top table. Then we have to say, of those incremental costs, what percentage of those costs are borne by residential versus commercial and industrial? We use the town's assessed valuation for residential as how we break that out. So we say right now 88% of the assessed value in the town of Needham is driven by residential. And 9% is driven by commercial and industrial property. The other 3% is personal property tax.
That's income or expense?
Neither. That is the makeup of the town's total assessed valuation.
Oh, assessed valuation, yes.
Yep, of all real property in the entire town. Is 88% residential, so we multiply in the first line item like 6.338 million, we multiply that by 88%, we get 5.57. Now, as I said before, don't have a line by line by line item breakdown of every single staff person and their costs. So for there, I wasn't able to say this is fixed and this is incremental. So what we did then was we needed to adjust that budget number by some, we call an efficiency factor, to say like a certain percentage of these are gonna be fixed, a certain percentage of these costs are gonna be incremental. That's where you see the efficiency adjustment. So we've been doing this for 40 years. Generally, the general government comes out between about 10 and 12% when we have the line item by line item budget. We use 10%. Fire and police, we tend to use very high numbers because the numbers are usually very high. So we use 75% for fire. So we're taking 75% of those costs, 60% for police, and public works tends to be about 10 to 15%. We use 15% here. The reason why public works often doesn't rise a ton is a lot of like larger multifamily development, they'll take care of their own trash, they take care of their own utilities for the most part on site, take care of landscaping, they'll shovel their own sidewalks, that kind of stuff. So it doesn't necessarily add a ton of DPW oriented costs. They're still kind of, especially in Needham where all the infrastructure is basically built out probably to the point where it's gonna be. So it's not like they gotta build and maintain a brand new road or build and maintain a whole new, sewer interceptor or something like that. You may need to replace things, but that's gonna be borne by the town, not by the development most likely. So that's why we use a slightly lower cost. So then we take our proportional share number, multiply it by the efficiency adjustment, and we get our total adjusted expenses. So our total adjusted expenses, if you go to the bottom, is about 13.3 million, give or take.
Is schools separated out here?
I'll get to that. I like to do that separate because it's totally different animal. And one that people really like to see. So now we need to figure out across that 13.3 million for the incremental or variable budget, how do we then apportion that to a per household? So that as we're thinking about new development, we have a number to multiply by the households. So we do that by saying, well, how many households are there in Needham today? According to the 2021 census estimates, it's 11,710. So we basically take the 13.299 million, we divide it by 11,710, and we get a cost per household of $1,136 on an annual basis. So that's the cost that we're gonna say, just municipal costs, not schools. That's the cost that we're gonna say on the municipal side, every new housing unit in this MBTA district is going to cost the town on the municipal side.
And I guess the caveat is that this is just operating costs.
Yeah, no capital. We don't do capital.
But I think, I understand if you don't do it, but that's something I think the finance committee has to think about, because what we often see is incremental costs up until a certain point, and then a step change when you have to build a new building.
Totally.
Or have a new sewer pipe.
Totally.
Or, like, the capacity has a step change.
I totally agree. Yeah, and that's why Katie and I are gonna try to meet with department heads and talk about what those stress points are for different departments. Yep, I totally understand. This is purely operational. Okay, schools. Schools is in almost every community I work in Massachusetts, the largest portion of the budget. So it's, sort of important that we kind of get this one to where people can agree. So there's two big pieces of schools. One is the budget. The other is we need to figure out an appropriate ratio for how many children might be generated by a hypothetical development. The table on the left is what we call the student, the school age children multipliers or the ratios. So you can see for studios and ones, we assume there's almost never any children. In a studio, you're not gonna have a kid. In a 1-bedroom, you're unlikely to have it. The 2-bedroom, actually the 1 and the 2-bedroom numbers come directly from Needham's SAC metrics that were provided to us by the town for Modera, Kendrick, and Charles River. So these are real numbers. I will note that they provided us with their demographers' assumptions before that those were actually built, and then the after results, and the after results were less children than what the demographer had projected. I just want to say that because that's often a huge misnomer that multifamily generates an incredible amount of children and it on a per unit basis, and it really doesn't. The 3 beds for both the market rate and the affordable are numbers that we've used elsewhere, seen and used elsewhere in the region. They didn't really have, I thought, realistic numbers in there. So we just, to err on the side of being more conservative or not underestimating, we just bumped up those numbers. So those are the multipliers that we use against the bedroom counts. The table on the right gets to the budget. So we used the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education's, the best they have right now is the FY 22-23 budget. And again, we only take the general fund expenditures from that school budget. Because we have to net it of state aid and, you know, sort of those reoccurring revenues from the state. Since property taxes don't cover those. We also take these primary categories that we find to be incremental and not fixed. Again, this isn't like most of the administration and things like that tend to be fixed cost, where classroom teachers, instructional leadership, which might be your classroom aides or specialty teachers that are coming in and out of the building. Other teaching services, obviously instructional materials are going to vary as you increase children, and pupil transportation costs, and then pupil services. So that totals, if we take all those, what we would consider to be incremental costs, that totals to 67.5 million. We divide that 67 million by the enrollment in the schools, and we get a per pupil, incremental per pupil cost of 12,128. The actual per pupil general fund cost is about 19,829 net of state aid. So it accounts for a pretty hefty portion of like the all-in cost to educate a child. And I will say, I've been doing this for a long time. The 12,000 is high, but I also recognize the town spends a lot on schools. But that's a really high number, which I feel like we're then not underestimating that number. So I do feel good about that.
It's good that you break it out because it's a huge difference between the two numbers.
Yeah. So then to calculate everything that we just talked about, so to get the revenue number, we have the number of units times the per unit revenue. That's how we're generating our gross property tax revenue. Obviously we divide that total revenue by 1,000, multiply it by the tax rate to get the tax revenue. The municipal cost, the number of units times the $1,136. Then we have the number of units times the number of students expected times the $12,000 per school kid. That gives us the education costs. So then we take gross property tax revenue minus municipal costs minus education, gives us our net fiscal impact. Okay, now for the results. I broke it down into just the 4 scenarios that we had talked about originally. So this does not include scenario 5 and 6. Those obviously, the higher the unit count, the better the fiscal impact is, because on a per unit basis, the fiscal impact is positive. It's not negative. So that's why your numbers here, you know, we're showing 2.2 million over 1,600 units. As we work our way across, 3.4 over 2,500 units, 3.5 million over 2,600 units, 3.8 over 2,800 units. So if we were to measure 3,500 units in scenario 6 or whatever the number is, you would expect that the fiscal impact would go up commensurately. Again, this is a snapshot in time. It's based on all information we know today. And I think there are 2 things that I like to caveat when it comes to the MBTA districts. One, these districts may never develop. They may develop over 20 years. So this is, again, a snapshot in time. This also assumes every single unit is built in that district. And I think we know that is probably unlikely to happen, right? Not every property owner is going to sell. Not every developer is going to build. So there will be some of this, but I think the good news is, from our perspective, it's a positive net fiscal impact on a per unit basis. So whatever gets built, hopefully will just contribute to the town's overall financial health. And then, as I mentioned, we ran just the CPA tax and excise tax. I will say the only caveat with this is for the CPA tax, it's based on everything after the first $100,000 in value. You can imagine what the values are for a district. So I didn't even bother sort of subtracting out that 100,000 because it doesn't really make that much of a difference. But I will say I didn't do that. But, you know, this just adds to the town. You know, the excise tax is funny. Sometimes we included it, but it's sort of a regressive tax, because as the vehicle gets older, the taxes come down actually substantially. So again, just take it for what it's worth. It's a snapshot in time. We have no idea how many vehicles are actually going to be in these developments. We don't know the value of those vehicles. This is just based on the average excise tax that the town collected last year, divided by the number of vehicles. So the other thing with the fiscal impact analysis is we don't have a way of measuring anyone who might move to any of these units from the town today. So they're already paying taxes somewhere, they already have a vehicle. And let's say they have school kids, they might move those school kids from one unit to a new unit in this development. So this really assumes like all the units are new, all the residents are new, all the cars are new, but we know in reality,
But even if someone's moving from existing, already
Yeah, they
living
may
in
free
town,
up that.
someone else
yeah.
is probably going to move in to
Yeah.
replace them. in
Yeah.
their location.
And so to that point, communities, I assume Needham will be the same, we'll talk to the schools. One thing to just think about too, because this has come up in other communities for MBTA. If you have, say, older adults who don't have children and are living in a single family home, and they were to move to one of these new units, probably the biggest school impact is gonna be from that move and being backfilled by a family who might move into a 2,500 square foot, 4-bedroom home and probably have a child or two. But I don't have any way of sort of measuring like internal movement and people's decisions around housing and what that would account for. But I'm just trying to say, like, these are a lot of the questions that will come up, and I imagine will come up at some point, might come up in January. So just a lot of caveats around this, but I think at the end of the day, I think the good news is it's generating positive fiscal value for the town. And we find this pretty much everywhere we work.
I guess a question for Gary, can we, in the timeline, can we know when we can expect to hear from the departments about what their thresholds are, the capacity thresholds before they have to build a new fire department, a new water main, like things like that, because capital, I think, is the big caveat here. Between, even though they all look positive on the operation side, it's possible that when you calculate the capital costs, some, the bigger ones especially may start to look negative.
Yeah.
We can come back at the next meeting and speak in more detail about process, but I'd say we aren't gonna have all of the departments do a full analysis for them on each of these scenarios, so. Right, so it's after we get through that January meeting and this group is starting to narrow.
What is the tipping point is what you're
It
saying.
is,
What is the
yeah.
tipping point? Because when I was on PPPC for many years and we did a master plan. We know Pollard can't sustain, we know like certain things can't occur. So those are big capital projects. And so understanding just those big capital projects, I think would be helpful.
And not just the ones planned, I mean, like
Well, there's,
what's the,
Right,
the plans for Pollard, but I'm thinking about things, like the drainage capacity, the number of fire departments we have in town. At what point do we need to build another
right.
big building that's not?
How many units tips it to the next one?
Yes, yeah.
Right.
Yeah, so we can come back at your next meeting and speak to that in more detail, our process and timeline.
Yeah, just not the input. Like, we won't have the input by January 4th.
Right.
Yeah.
Yes, we're,
Yeah, okay. I just
we're
wanted
just
to-
talking
yeah,
about
just wanted to make
process,
sure, yeah.
yeah, yep.
Methodology, kind of a.
Anecdotally, and I should know this, but I don't, if we're talking about like 2,500 units all built out potentially. And the population needs,
32,000.
so if all these units got built out, we're still under 10% of new inventory. And some of it would be replacing existing. Right? Is that a way to look at it?
Yeah, I mean, that's a great point.
To put it in perspective from a financial, I mean, they're not.
And we're talking about the span of maybe, maybe as little as 5, but maybe as much as 20 or 20 years.
Yeah.
Right.
But just think from a perspective standpoint, we
Yeah.
talk about capital projects in these schools, I don't think this type of implementation is it could. But I just don't know, because I don't know if the tipping point on each of these things, but it's just perspective.
Look, that's a good point, because a lot of the input on, the number of units comes from areas in our town that already are developed for multifamily housing. So you really have to consider that if you're replacing that multifamily housing with something new, and you still have so many units per acre, it's not gonna be that many more new units. So I think somehow that has to be taken into account. Yeah.
Just like accounting for it on the timeline, I think it's a lot faster to build new housing units than it is to build a new school or a new fire department. So, like, I think our infrastructure, I think we need to at least foresee what our infrastructure needs will be, so we can plan for them.
And I think if you layer in what's already, if you took this hypothetical and then you layered in what the probability of some of this being built, that might help with that planning.
Well, can I ask a question? Eric, I mean, these are a great conversation, but the state, I assume, your fiscal impact analysis is, I assume, consistent with what the state is looking for.
It is not, because this is not a requirement. This was what the town asked us to do.
Oh, this is not required to go to the state.
Nope, this was purely
So
for
there's
town
no
information.
protocol from the state as to how to.
It's the economic feasibility analysis that has to go to the state.
I thought they both had to, so.
Yeah,
thank
no, we just did this because it was
Okay.
requested.
you.
I
Okay.
see that Michael has his hand up.
Yeah, I just wanted to, there was some question about what the, what the potential build out. I just have 2 data points, at least from estimates of other towns. So, recently Arlington passed their version of this, and their total, what you call capacity, was about 3,000. But they identified the fact that there were 1,800 units already within their zones. So that would leave a net possible new number of new additional units would be about 1,200, and their maximum estimate was about 200 being built over 10 years. In the case of Lexington, I think they similarly have a zoned capacity of over 3,000. I don't know what the existing number of housing units were, because I think they mostly are doing overlays of commercial areas. But their estimate, their middle estimate, based on, they said, a combination of guesswork and some actual lots that they knew there was some interest on, was about 600 over the course of 10 years. And Lexington is about 10% or so larger than Needham. So, if this goes through at, let's say, 2,000 or whatever it might be, there are already hundreds of units on the ground in the areas that we're looking at. And as noted, it feels unlikely to me that Sudbury Farms is going to move anytime soon, that Roach Brothers is going to move anytime soon. And so to me, there may be some good potential in Lower Chestnut, but I think that a lot of the areas would likely not have anything going on for a pretty good period of time.
In the 3 scenarios in January, is it possible to show, in addition to the number of zone units that would be allowed, the incremental number of what currently exists?
Yeah, I just wrote that down.
Thank you.
Currently exists on the ground, or currently exists in terms of what the current zoning would allow as a build out?
On the ground.
On the
On the
ground,
ground, okay.
because then you can do comparison.
Yeah,
That's a good point.
All right. It's quite late. I'm fading.
This is our mojo.
And these-
This room.
We've, I think we've accomplished everything we set out to do tonight. So we worked hard, we did what we needed to do. So I'm gonna, ask if there is a motion.
So moved.
Second. Michael, we'll start with you. Thumbs up, yes. Kevin?
Sure, yes.
Sure.
James?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
I vote yes, we are adjourned. Thank you, everyone.
Happy New Year.
Thank you and Happy New Year.
Yes.
It might come my way. It might come my way. Have a nice holiday.
Thank you very much. You too.
Thank you.
And then there.
When we come back, we get started on zoning, right? When we come back, we get started on the zoning.
So is that?
That would be the fun part.
That will be the fun part.
The minimum scenario,
No,
but in this one right here.
Yes.
It is.
Because in the state guidelines.
Oh, yes.
So I don't know how you.
Yeah. No, it's so true.
There's
no point to it, right?
Exactly.
So, thank you. So we can